Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? There's a tape buried in a rusted lockbox, hidden beneath a floorboard. No one's walked over in almost 50 years. No one knows it exists, no one living, at least. And once you hear what's on it, you'll wish you never had. It's not the kind of thing you stumble on by chance. It calls to people. It waits, patient and silent, and then it reaches out, not with a hand, but with something colder, something older. It starts with a whisper in your sleep, a scratching at the edge of thought, and by the time you try to leave, it's too late. This story isn't just about the tape. It's about what happened to the last person who found it, and what happened after. It began on a rainy Thursday in the town of Briar Falls, a place people barely remember, even when they've lived there their whole lives. It's small, tucked between hills and choked by trees, the kind of town that seems to rot in place. Streetlights flicker in broad daylight. The local diner always smells faintly of burnt meat and mildew. And at the edge of town stands a house no one speaks of, the Marrow House. Abandoned since 1971, it's a place that exists only in half sentences and long glances. Parents use it as a threat. Kids dare each other to step inside, but no one ever really does. Not until Jonah. Jonah Hale was 28, restless, and recently dumped. After 5 years in New York working for a production company that specialized in cleaning up crime scene audio for documentaries, he'd grown numb to most things. Screams, static, muffled begging. It was just another day in the editing booth. But after the breakup, something inside him cracked. He left the city without telling anyone, packed up his recording gear, and headed toward a town he barely remembered from his childhood summers with his aunt. Briar Falls. He rented a room above the hardware store, ate dry cereal out of the box, and spent his days recording ambient sounds from the woods and fields. He said he was making a personal project. No one cared enough to ask questions. But Jonah wasn't just looking for sounds. He was looking for something else. Something he couldn't name. He'd wake up with bruises on his arms, scratches on his legs, nightmares he couldn't shake. He began hearing things during playback, soft tapping in the distance, someone breathing behind the mic. He cleaned the files. They came back. He deleted them. They reappeared. Then came the dream. He stood at the foot of a staircase in total darkness. The walls pulsed like skin. Something moved upstairs, slow, deliberate, heavy. He couldn't see it, but he knew it had no eyes. It didn't need them. It already knew him. It had always known him. When Jonah woke, there was mud on his feet. Real, wet mud, and clenched in his hand was a rusted key. He traced it back the next day. Through whispered questions and long drives down broken roads, he found it the Marrow House. Chained shut, boarded up, forgotten, but the key fit. Of course it did. Inside, the air was thick, heavy like a held breath. Dust coated every surface. Wallpaper peeled like dead skin. The floor groaned with every step, as though the house resented his weight. But it wasn't the rooms that caught his attention. It was the sound, the constant, low hum, just beneath hearing. Like something alive was humming through the walls. He followed it to the basement. Found a trapdoor in the corner, hidden beneath an old rug. Beneath that, a short staircase ending in dirt and rot. And there, buried under a floorboard marked with a crude symbol carved into the wood, he found the lockbox. The tape was inside, unlabeled, unmarked, wrapped in cloth that stank of iron and something far worse. Jonah didn't open it there. He couldn't. Something in his body screamed at him to run, to leave the house, to burn the tape and salt the ashes. But curiosity is louder than fear when it wants to be. So he left, and he brought the tape back with him. That night, he cleaned it, set up his equipment, and pressed play. At first, just silence. Then a pop, a soft hiss. The static of something ancient being woken from deep sleep. Then came the sound of footsteps, bare feet slapping against concrete, slow and wet. Then breathing, low, ragged, inhuman, and then a voice, not loud, not angry, just wrong. Like a child learning how to speak by copying the dead. Jonah, he recoiled. Hit stop, checked the waveform. No one had said his name in the recording booth. He played it again. Same thing. Jonah? Then the breathing, closer now. Then something whispered, too soft to hear, but his ears rang with it anyway. That night, the nightmares got worse. He was back in the Marrow house. But this time, the house was breathing. The walls pulsed. The air was thick with flies. And down the hallway, behind a door that shouldn't exist, something waited for him. He couldn't see it, but he could hear it, dragging itself closer, breathing his name. He woke screaming. The next day, Jonah locked the tape away, hid it behind a panel in the wall, but the damage was done. From that night forward, his recordings were never clean again. Every track contained the same hum. Every playback included that voice, that breathing, and every night he dreamed of the house. Until the dreams turned into memories. He remembered being a child, playing near the woods, following a trail of feathers into the trees. He remembered the old woman with no eyes who spoke to him in riddles. He remembered the hole in the earth that breathed like lungs. He remembered hands pulling him down, nails digging into his skin. He remembered screaming. But he didn't remember ever being found. He began to change. His skin grew pale, almost gray. He stopped eating, stopped speaking. He spent hours listening to static, scribbling symbols in his notebook, symbols that didn't come from any language anyone recognized. Locals began to talk, said they saw him walking barefoot through the woods at night, muttering to himself. One said they saw him standing in the middle of the road, staring at the sky like he was waiting for something. Then one day he was gone. The room above the hardware store stood empty. Everything left behind, his notebooks, his clothes, the tape. They say the room smelled of rot for weeks, and then the deaths began. First, it was Mrs. Cranley, the old librarian, found sitting in her chair, eyes missing, mouth stitched shut, no signs of forced entry, no sign of struggle. But in her hand was a scrap of paper with a symbol on it, one that matched Jonah's notebook. Then came Deputy Harris, hung upside down from a tree, entrails draped like streamers. Carved into his chest was a phrase in some forgotten script. A sound technician from out of town who was staying the weekend checked into the local inn. Found dead the next morning, head turned fully backward, and on the bedside table, a tape recorder playing static. The town went quiet. People stopped going out after dark. The hardware store shut down. The library locked its doors. No one dared talk about Jonah, but rumors swirled. Some said he'd opened something. Others said he became something. But no one, not one soul, would go near the Marrow house. And yet, 1 year later, someone did. Her name was Lena Maddox, 24, freelance audio engineer, curious, hungry. She'd heard the whispers online, scattered forum posts, half remembered stories. She followed the breadcrumbs, found the town, found the room Jonah stayed in, and eventually she found the tape. And she pressed play. What she heard should have driven her mad. But she kept listening, night after night, and with every play she changed. Her eyes went darker, her voice softer. People noticed, but they didn't say a word, because Lena wasn't alone. There were others now, people who'd heard the tape, people who'd followed the sound, people who dreamed of the house. And deep beneath Briar Falls, in the black mouth of the earth where roots hang like veins and the air tastes of copper and ash, something watches. Something waits. And the last tape. It's still out there. Somewhere. Calling for the next listener. The question is, will it be you? It started with the scratching. Lena Maddox hadn't even been in Briar Falls for a full week before she began to hear it. Faint at first. So quiet she thought it was her mind playing tricks. It would creep in during the quietest hours, somewhere between midnight and 3 a.m. when even the wind outside the old inn seemed to hold its breath. A soft, rhythmic sound beneath the floorboards, like something clawing at wood with broken nails. At first, she tried to ignore it, thought it might be mice, maybe raccoons. But deep down, she knew better. She'd come here chasing a story. A hidden recording passed around obscure corners of online forums. No one shared it openly. It was always referenced in vague, fearful posts, that damn Briar Falls audio. Don't listen to it. Or if you find the Jonah tape, destroy it. It's not just a recording. That kind of thing. Naturally, that only fed Lena's interest. She was always drawn to the obscure, the unexplained. Her small podcast had earned a cult following by dissecting unsolved mysteries and analyzing cursed audio files. Most were fake. Some were disturbing, but none had ever felt alive. The moment she found mention of Jonah Hale, something inside her clicked. Not recognition, exactly, but a strange, undeniable pull. Like hearing a melody you've never known but somehow remember. She dug through threads, scoured archives, until she found an old digital scan of a torn notebook page with a symbol on it. A jagged eye drawn in black ink with what looked like teeth for lashes. The caption beneath it simply read, "Last known page of Jonah Hale's journal, retrieved from Briar Falls, 2003. Within 48 hours, Lena was on a bus headed straight there." The town was smaller than she expected. Less a town, more a memory with street signs. Most of the buildings looked like they hadn't been touched since the early 80s. Dust clung to everything like a second skin. No one made eye contact for long. When she mentioned Jonah's name at the gas station, the clerk, a young man with dead eyes, paused, stared at her a moment too long, and muttered, "You shouldn't be here," before ringing her up and turning away. But she didn't care. Warnings didn't stop Lena. They only meant she was getting close. She rented the room Jonah had stayed in, room 3B above the old hardware store. The place was still intact, though the wood creaked like old bones, and the smell of mildew lingered, no matter how long she kept the windows open. The first thing she noticed was how cold it was, not just in temperature, something else, a cold that felt personal, like it seeped into her, curling around her lungs and pressing into her chest when she breathed. She brushed it off. At least, at first. By day, she explored. The locals avoided her, especially when she asked about the Marrow house. The bartender at the Rusty Spoon told her she was digging where things best stay buried. An old man in a rocking chair near the church hissed at her when she walked by, mumbling something about the voice that chews the sky. But she pressed on, walked to the edge of town, stood at the rusted gate of the Marrow house. It looked worse than she'd imagined. The roof had collapsed in several places. Vines crawled up the walls like veins pumped with rot. The windows were black, not from tint, but from some thick residue inside. The air around it felt heavier. She reached for the gate once, but something in her hand went numb when she touched the iron. She didn't try again. Instead, she focused on Jonah's trail. Back in her room, she started combing through the journals left behind. The owner hadn't thrown anything away, said he knew better. Lena read every page. Scribbles, incoherent ramblings, notes and symbols no one could translate. But among the madness, patterns began to form, symbols repeated. Phrases echoed over and over. It watches below, the breath behind the wall, the house knows. Over time, Jonah's handwriting changed, tighter, more angular, like something had taken hold of him and squeezed out what made him human. And then, she found the key, taped to the back of the last journal, rusted, ornate, shaped like an open mouth. She didn't remember falling asleep that night. One moment she was reading. The next she was standing in the hallway outside her room, barefoot, hands trembling. The door to 30B hung open behind her. Her feet were wet. She looked down. Mud. Again. That's when the scratching started, louder this time. Beneath the floorboards, below the bed. Not the scratch of an animal. No, this was slower, intentional. like something trying to write its way up through the wood. She knelt down, pressed her ear to the ground, held her breath. Scratch, scratch. Pause, scratch, scratch, scratch. Her heart pounded. She tried to back away, but then, faint and clear as a whisper in her ear, came the sound of a voice. Alina. She scrambled back, slamming into the nightstand, knocking over her recorder. The voice hadn't come from below. It had come from inside her head. It sounded like her, but wrong, hollow, like an echo that remembered what it once was and hated it. She didn't sleep after that. The next morning, Lena pulled up the boards beneath the bed. The wood came up easy. Too easy. Almost like it wanted to be lifted. Beneath it was nothing but dirt. Dry, cracked soil. But deep in the center, she found it. A symbol. Carved into the packed earth. The eye with the teeth. She ran her fingers over it and felt heat. Not warmth, heat, like touching skin fevered from infection. And something else too. A heartbeat. Faint, slow. That afternoon, she stopped recording her podcast updates. She set up her equipment differently. Used older mics. Ran static filters through analog decks. Something told her the digital tools wouldn't work anymore. And that night, when she pressed record, the air in the room shifted. It was like the sound leaned forward. On playback, she heard nothing for the first few minutes. Then came a soft chime, like a child's music box off, key and slowing. Then a thud, then breathing. Then her voice, recorded earlier that day, played back in reverse. Then silence, until it said her name again. Lelina, and then another voice. One that wasn't hers. One that didn't sound human. Well, it's not a Hausa. She froze. The rest of the tape dissolved into screaming, hundreds of voices, layered over each other like they were falling through a hole with no bottom. And beneath it, the hum. That same awful hum Jonah had recorded. She pulled off the headphones and cried. She didn't leave town. She couldn't. The next night, she woke up with dirt under her fingernails. Her feet were muddy. Her recorder was running, though she didn't remember pressing play. On it was 2 hours of silence. Then whispering. Then a lullaby. One she didn't recognize, but somehow knew every word of. She sang along. And that's when the door opened. Not the front door. Not the bedroom door. The floor. Right in the center of the symbol. The earth split. Not violently, not loud. Just a quiet, deliberate crack, as though it had waited a long time to let her in. She didn't scream. Didn't run. She walked to the edge and looked down. No bottom, just black. And breathing. She knelt. Pressed her hand to the soil. Whispered something she didn't remember learning. And the breathing stopped. Then the voice said, "Now we see." She blinked. The room was normal again. But everything had changed. She saw symbols in the wallpaper. Faces in the wood grain. She could hear people walking down the stairs outside who weren't there. And every mirror reflected something standing behind her, just outside of view. She smiled. And started recording again. Because the tape wasn't finished, and the house, it wasn't just waiting, it was calling. Lena no longer trusted doors. Not just the ones in the house, above the hardware store, but all of them. The closet door that sometimes stood ajar when she swore she'd shut it. The bathroom door that creaked open at 3:17 every morning like it had somewhere to be. Even the front door, which now clicked 3 times before locking itself at night. None of them behaved as doors should. But worse than the doors that were there were the ones that weren't. Because on the 4th night, Lena found one. A door that hadn't existed before. A door the building's blueprint didn't mention. A door behind the shelf in the corner. Small, wooden, and painted red. Hidden like a secret with a grudge. She stared at it for a long time before touching it. The red paint was fresh, wet to the touch. It stained her fingertips, as if the door had bled a little when she brushed her hand over it. No handle. No hinges. Just a flat rectangle of wood embedded in the wall, warm like breath. Her pulse quickened. Not out of fear. At least, not the kind she was used to. This was different. This was curiosity twisting into hunger. And then she heard it, a knock. From inside the door. Not loud, not angry, just deliberate. 3 soft knocks. And behind them, something whispering. Not words, but shapes. Sickly wet syllables that made her ears buzz. She pressed her ear to the red wood and closed her eyes. A voice met her there, low and hushed, yet so close it sounded like it was growing inside her skull. You saw it. It saw you. She stumbled back, knocking over the shelf, heart thundering in her chest. The voice faded, but not completely. It lingered like a tune stuck in her head, crawling beneath her thoughts. She wanted to run, wanted to leave the room, the building, the town. But her legs didn't listen. Instead, she stared at the red door, watching, waiting, hoping it would open again. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she searched the floorboards for the symbol again, but the eye with the teeth was gone. The boards had reformed, smooth and unbroken, as if they'd never been touched. She even checked her recordings from the night before. Hours of static. Whispers, the occasional hum. But the part she remembered, her voice saying things she hadn't meant, hadn't thought, was gone, replaced by a long silence broken only once by a slow knock in the background, 3 times. She counted them. And then the scratching returned, louder now. Not just below, but inside the walls. Sometimes on the ceiling, sometimes behind the mirror. As if the whole building had become a throat, and something was crawling up through it. That day, she made her first mistake. She asked a question out loud. What do you want? She didn't expect an answer, but one came. Remember, it wasn't a whisper this time. It was a word spoken in her own voice, but not from her. It came from behind the mirror. She watched her reflection say it while her mouth stayed closed. Then, a trickle of red spilled from the mirror's corner like blood from a wound, seeping slowly down the wall. Lena ran, not out of the building. Not yet. Instead, she ran to the town archives. She needed answers. And if no one in this town was willing to speak to her, then the records would have to. The archive building was a stone thing, hunched between the post office and the church. Dust danced in sunbeams that cut through the stained glass above the door. The woman at the desk didn't look up when Lena walked in. She didn't move at all, except for one bony finger that pointed toward the basement. The light didn't reach the basement. Lena's flashlight barely did either. But she found the records, crumbling files, yellowed photographs, and old newspapers going back 100 years. And there, buried in a 1971 incident report, was the name Jonah Hale, age 9. Reported missing for 72 hours. Found naked and catatonic at the edge of the woods. Eyes wide open. Unblinking. Unmoving. No injuries. No signs of trauma. But written in his own blood across his chest was the phrase, "I let it in." There was no follow-up report. No investigation notes. Just a typewritten line, "Case closed. Jonah returned." No further inquiry necessary. She kept digging. She found more names. Kids gone missing for days, always returning, always silent, always different. In 1922, they blamed devil fever. In 1896, fey trickery. In 1843, they just called it the hush. Each time it happened, the town recorded it. And each time, someone disappeared into the ground and came back touched by something they couldn't name. One note stuck with her. Scribbled in the margin of a leather, bound town ledger, it starts with sound. Always sound. Once you hear it, you belong to it. We don't bury the cursed. We listen to them. Lena left the archives with shaking hands. That night, she locked the red door behind the shelf inside the room. She nailed boards over it, drew salt lines, lit candles. Anything she could think of, drawn from folk stories and ritual blogs. But when the clock struck 3:17, the door began to hum. Not shake, not rattle, hum. And Lena heard voices again. This time, hundreds of them, all saying one word in unison: "Open." She screamed. But her mouth didn't open. Not this time. Her body locked. Her eyes rolled back. And inside her head, something moved. She awoke hours later on the floor. The red door still shut, but the boards were gone. The salt was gone. The candles had melted down into long black worms that curled along the carpet. Her recorder sat on the desk, blinking. Full. She hadn't pressed record. She didn't remember pressing record. She played it anyway. At first, silence. Then a breath. Then her voice again. Soft, almost gentle. But not hers. Not her. Do you remember when the world was just breath and teeth and the dark between stars? You will. We'll help you remember. Then the sound of scraping. Wood, metal, skin. Something clawing through itself. Then a knock, 3 times. And a new sound. One she hadn't heard before. A door opening. She dropped the recorder. It hit the floor and split open. A burst of static shot out, and for just a moment Lena saw it, reflected in the mirror across the room. A figure. Tall. Thin. No face. Just a yawning mouth filled with rows of broken radios, each crackling with a different scream. Then it was gone. And the red door. Now it had a handle. Lena didn't know what terrified her more, that the door had changed or that she felt an urge to turn the handle. She backed away slowly, packed her bag, grabbed the notebooks, the recorder, the key Jonah left. She had to leave. Get out of Briar Falls. Get away from the sound, the house, the voice. She made it to the door. The real door. The front one. She pulled it open. But outside wasn't the hallway. It was the basement of the Marrow house. Mud walls. Hanging roots. The smell of iron and old blood. She slammed the door and fell back, heart racing. Tried the window. Bricked over. The vents, filled with earth. Every exit gone. Every door a lie. She was inside it now. Inside whatever this was. The room grew colder. The floor began to hum. And the red door began to breathe. Lena did the only thing she could think to do. She turned on the recorder. Because someone someday needed to hear what came next. Someone needed to remember. Before the door opened again, it started with her smile. Not because she was happy. No. Lena hadn't felt a single drop of happiness since the red door appeared. But because she couldn't stop. Her mouth held a grin that didn't belong to her, a stretched, too wide expression that pulled at the corners like invisible hands were forcing her to wear it. It was unnatural. Her cheeks ached. Her lips cracked. Yet every time she passed a mirror, she saw it. Teeth bared, gums dry, and her eyes blank like someone else was behind them, watching the world through a borrowed shell. And then came the echo. It began inside her teeth. A vibration, faint at first, like the aftershock of a sound she couldn't hear. But it was there, every time she opened her mouth, every time she whispered into the recorder. Her molars trembled with it. Her jaw ticked. The echo pulsed along her gums and down her throat, humming low and constant like something buried under her tongue. She felt it most when the house was silent. When the lights flickered and the wind outside stopped howling, and the only thing left was that vibration, growing louder, pushing outward. She stopped speaking for a while, not because she didn't want to, but because the voice that came out wasn't hers anymore. The first time it happened, she'd been whispering into her recorder, trying to recount what she'd seen the night before. How the red door had begun to sweat, how something pressed its shape against the wood from the other side, how a single, gray finger had slid out through the seam and drawn a smile on her window in fog. But what played back wasn't her voice. It was deeper, hollow, wet, more than breath, more than skin. You're waking up, Lena. She flung the recorder across the room. It didn't break, just landed, slowly spinning. The play button still lit. She left it there. Couldn't bear to touch it. That was 3 days ago, or 3 nights ago. Time didn't move right anymore. The sun still rose, but only for a few minutes. Then the sky would fade to gray, then purple, then black. The birds were gone. The clock stopped ticking. Her reflection began to change. At first it was subtle, a shift in her posture, a blink that took too long. Then she noticed it smiling when she wasn't. Then it started whispering. She'd pass the mirror and catch it mouthing something over and over. No sound came out, but her lips moved on their own when she watched too long. One night, she taped a piece of paper over every mirror in the room. The next morning, they were gone. Not removed. Gone. As if the mirrors had swallowed them. So she covered her ears, stopped speaking, sat in the corner with her notebook, and tried to write her way out. She filled pages with symbols, with questions, with memories she wasn't sure were hers. She remembered being in the woods at 6 years old, following music that came from the ground. She remembered her mother singing lullabies that ended with screams. She remembered drowning in a place with no water. The memories came faster each day, and she wrote them down because writing them made them feel real. And she needed something to feel real. The worst part was the silence, because the house wasn't truly silent. It pretended to be. Sometimes, the quiet stretched too long, stretched so thin it became brittle. And behind it, behind the quiet, was something else. A sound that didn't belong in the world. Not music, not a voice. Something breathing sideways. Something old. She heard it clearest when she sat perfectly still. That was when the voices started to bleed through again. Not just her own. Not Jonah's. Others. Whispers from people long gone. A woman sobbing while reciting dates. A child counting backward in threes. A man laughing, gasping, then choking. All of them layered over each other. Like they were trapped in the walls, stuffed into the vents, clawing at the corners of her ears to be let out. And each voice ended the same way. A knock, 3 times. Then a long, hungry silence. Lena's body began to change. Not visibly, not at first. But she felt it. Her heartbeat had a new rhythm, slower. As if something else had taken control of time inside her chest. Her shadow no longer followed her movements. Sometimes it stood still while she paced. Sometimes it left the room entirely. She didn't sleep, not really. When she closed her eyes, the world turned inside out. She'd wake with her hands covered in dirt, in ink, in scratches. Once, she found herself humming a lullaby she didn't know in a language that didn't sound human. And the echo in her teeth began to sing. It started when she tried to cry. She'd collapsed in the bathroom, curled on the cold tiles. Staring at the ceiling where faces sometimes appeared in the mildew, she tried to scream. Tried to weep. But instead, her mouth opened wide, wider than it should have, until her jaw popped, and the echo poured out. Not words, not a scream, a song. A single note, long and dissonant, so loud the light bulb shattered. The sound rattled the walls, peeled paint, killed every fly in the room. She didn't remember closing her mouth. But when she looked in the mirror, her lips were bleeding. Her teeth vibrated. And behind her in the glass, she saw the red door. It had followed her. It wasn't just in the room anymore. It moved. Every reflection, every shadow, every photograph she'd taken in town, somewhere in the background. The red door stood, patient and watching, always closed, always humming, and Lena began to understand. The tape wasn't just a recording. It wasn't a message or a curse. It was a mouth full of sound, feeding on memory, on voice, on fear. And she had listened. She had opened it. And now it was learning to speak through her. The next time she played the recording, it didn't just whisper her name. It asked a question. "Are you ready to let me in?" She didn't answer. But her hand moved on its own. Toward the recorder. Toward the play button. Toward the red door now pulsing like a heartbeat in the mirror. And when she pressed play again, the sound that came through wasn't music, wasn't static, wasn't human. It was footsteps slow, dragging, getting closer. She pressed stop. The sound didn't stop. She unplugged the recorder. It kept playing. She smashed it against the wall. The footsteps grew louder. She pressed her back to the door, the real door, and watched as the floor beneath her began to stretch. As the wood warped and split. As long, gray fingers slid through the seams and curled upward, grabbing the air, pulling. Then she heard it again, the echo in her teeth. This time it didn't vibrate. This time it spoke. "You were born for this." Lena screamed, but no one heard her. Because outside her room, the town was silent. Because in the walls, the voices were holding their breath. Because deep beneath the floor, something had finally found her. And it was still hungry. The silence after the scream was heavier than anything Lena had ever known. It didn't echo, didn't bounce back. It just hung in the air, thick and oppressive, as if the world itself had paused, waiting for something she couldn't name. She clawed at the door behind her, the one that led to the outside. Or at least, what should have been the outside. But it was no longer a door. It had melted into the wall like wax, the edges blurred and soft, impossible to grasp. The floor beneath her trembled as if the house was breathing. Deep, slow inhales, pulling the air through roots and soil, dragging it down into a dark, bottomless throat. Her hands felt numb, her breath short. Lena tried to scream again, but no sound came out. Her mouth moved. But it was as though a second mouth inside her had taken control, whispering words she didn't recognize. Words that sounded like ancient curses, twisted lullabies sung by voices lost to time. The vibration in her teeth intensified, pulsing with a strange rhythm that seemed to match the heartbeat she could feel pounding in the floor beneath her. The line between her body and the house was blurring. The walls started to weep, slow trails of dark liquid dripping from cracks in the plaster, pooling around her feet, sticky and cold. Faces emerged in the wet stains, screaming mouths, hollow eyes, frozen expressions of agony. They seemed trapped, begging silently for release, but the house swallowed their pleas. The air grew thick with the scent of iron and rot, choking and sharp. Lena stumbled back, her hands brushing against a rough surface that wasn't wall or floor, but something alive, something woven from roots and flesh. And then the voices came. Not whispers or echoes this time, but clear, insistent calls from everywhere and nowhere. Lena, Lena, the voice was fractured, layered with others like shards of broken glass scraping inside her skull. Each one begged for the same thing, remember. Open. Let us out. Her knees buckled as the house's pulse grew stronger, thrumming through the dirt and stone like an ancient heartbeat. Lena's vision blurred, colors bleeding into one another. She tried to focus, to grab hold of something real, but her mind was slipping. Memories not her own flooded in. Childhood screams in the woods, cold hands dragging her beneath the earth, the taste of dirt and fear in her mouth. She realized with a shudder that these weren't memories at all, but warnings from those trapped beneath. Suddenly, the floor beneath her cracked open, a jagged maw in the earth yawning wide. From the darkness, tendrils of black mist slithered upward, curling like smoke around her legs. They whispered promises of knowledge, of power, of escape, if only she would surrender. Lena's body trembled, caught between terror and temptation. The echo in her teeth flared, screaming with 1,000 voices that were hers and not hers at once. She felt herself unraveling, the edges of her identity fraying like tattered cloth. The red door from the mirror appeared before her, now a portal shimmering with unnatural light. Its handle turned slowly, beckoning. In a final surge of will, Lena forced herself upright and stepped back, away from the void and the whispering smoke. She reached for her recorder, the only tether to her sanity. But as she grasped it, the device cracked and splintered in her hands, the screen shattering into darkness. The voices crescendoed into a deafening roar, shaking the very bones of the house. And then, as suddenly as it began, the noise ceased. The house fell silent once more, but Lena knew it was only waiting, patient, hungry, eternal. Somewhere deep beneath Briar Falls, in the earth's cold heart, the voices were gathering. And the last tape was far from finished. Lena's breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling as the suffocating silence settled around her like a shroud. The house had fallen eerily still. Too still, like the moment before a storm tears the sky apart. She stood in the center of the room, surrounded by shadows that felt almost alive, shifting just beyond the corner of her vision. The red door had vanished again, as if it had never been there at all. But the unease it left behind clung to her skin like a second layer, thick and unrelenting. The whispering began again, softer this time, more deliberate. It wasn't coming from the walls or the floor, but from within her. A quiet voice twisting through her thoughts, speaking in riddles and half-truths, a language both foreign and hauntingly familiar. You remember, don't you? The promise beneath the soil. The pact written in blood. She closed her eyes, trying to push the words away, but the memories flooded in with brutal clarity. She was no stranger to Briar Falls, had never been, not truly. Her family's roots dug into the town's darkest soil, tangled with secrets too terrible to name. She recalled whispered stories her grandmother told as a child, tales of a hollow beneath the earth, where lost souls were kept prisoner, a place that breathed and hungered, where sound was a curse and silence a salvation. Jonah Hale hadn't disappeared by chance. Neither had the children before him. They had been chosen, marked by the house, bound to its hunger. And now, so was she. The air thickened, and a cold pressure pressed against her temples, as if the house itself was reaching inside her mind. Images flashed behind her eyelids, twisted faces trapped in darkness, a gaping maw lined with teeth made of broken glass, and a voice that wasn't a voice but a presence. Ancient, patient, relentless. You opened the door, it said, echoing inside her skull. Now you must listen. Lena felt the weight of 1,000 stories pressing down on her. The sorrow, the terror, the unanswered questions of those who came before. The tape wasn't just a recording, it was a vessel, a gateway. Each listener became a thread woven into the house's endless tapestry of despair, their voices joining the chorus trapped beneath the earth. She sank to the floor, clutching her head as the whispers grew louder, each one a desperate plea for release. But the truth was clear now: the house didn't want to be opened. It wanted to be opened, from the inside out. And Lena, with the echo in her teeth and the hunger in her bones, was its next key. It didn't sleep with her. It didn't rest. It followed, wherever she moved. It slithered in the silence between thoughts, a sound that shouldn't be a sound, a constant pressure behind her ears like her brain was being tuned by invisible hands. Lena hadn't left the room in days. Or maybe it had been longer. Time collapsed in on itself here, stretched and shrank like skin drying in the sun. The windows showed a world that didn't match. Sometimes it was night when she looked out, and snow fell in swirling black flakes. Other times it was day, but the sun was green, and the trees bowed toward the house like worshippers. But the noise of the noise stayed the same. It wasn't just the hum anymore. It had evolved, taken shape. First it became static, then whispers, then breathing, then wet footsteps in the hallway that stopped just outside her door, waiting, and then something new. A deep groaning that sounded like a chorus of buried voices, pulling themselves across the underside of the floorboards. Every time she pressed her ear to the ground, she heard them, calling, reaching, naming her. And one night, the floor started whispering back. It began as faint muttering, unformed words murmured like a bad radio signal. Then syllables formed, words she knew, names she'd never spoken. Commands she didn't understand but felt compelled to follow. Bring us up. She tried to leave, tried to rip open the door and run. But every time she touched the knob, it disappeared into fog. One moment she stood before an exit. The next she found herself staring at her own reflection, eyes black and wide, lips curled into that alien smile again. She spoke without moving her mouth. We're almost here. Each day that passed, the air thickened like syrup. Her body grew weaker while her senses sharpened. She could hear the spiders nesting behind the walls. She could feel the breath of someone, something, standing behind her in the shower. She no longer trusted the sound of her own voice, because sometimes it kept talking even after she'd stopped. Her mouth would close, but the tape kept rolling. And worst of all, She stopped recognizing her own thoughts. There were too many layers now. Too many voices tangled into one. Sometimes they argued. Sometimes they sang. But one always whispered louder than the rest. Let them through. The red door reappeared 3 days ago. Right in the center of the room. Not in the mirror this time, not behind the bookshelf. Just there, flattened, confident. Its wood looked wet, and it breathed like a wound. Its handle was bone. Every night at 3:17 the same thing happened, the knocking. 3 times, then silence. Then something behind the door exhaling like it had waited all day to smell her fear. She never opened it. But she wanted to. God, how she wanted to. Because the longer she stayed in that house, the louder the noise got. Not in her ears, in her soul. A pressure building inside her that threatened to split her in half. It itched under her skin, curled around her bones. It wanted out, so she did the only thing she could think to do. She turned the recorder back on. Her voice came out calm. Too calm. She spoke like someone relaying a bedtime story, emotionless and slow. This is tape 12. I've stopped counting the days. The house isn't interested in time. It's interested in attention. If you listen long enough, it finds a way in. If you hear it, really hear it, it changes you, makes you part of the story. She paused. A creak echoed in the background, followed by slow breathing just out of frame. They're not dead, she whispered. None of them. Jonah, the others, they're awake, just buried. Their voices crawl through the walls, carried in the wires in the wood, stitched into the floors. They sing through the pipes when no one's listening. Her voice changed on the last word. It didn't sound like her. It was deeper, older. Soon the house will open its mouth. Then she shut the recorder off, sat in the dark, waited. Because something was coming, and she was beginning to wonder if maybe she had already let it in. It spoke for the first time at 3:17 a.m., as it always did. Not a voice from the recorder, not a whisper from the floor or behind the mirror. The house itself spoke, timbers groaning, pipes shuddering, floorboards bending under pressure that didn't come from weight but from will. It didn't sound like speech in any human way, not syllables or consonants, not even breath. But Lena understood it. Every creak and rattle struck her bones like a tuning fork. She didn't just hear the house. She felt it pressing against her skull from the inside. She sat still, curled in the farthest corner from the red door. Her body had grown thinner, paler, her skin stretched taut over a frame that barely remembered what it meant to eat. But her eyes, they had changed. Gone was the panic, the wide-eyed horror. In its place was a kind of heavy calm, like someone who had finally accepted the executioner's axe. The kind of peace that only arrives when you stop believing in escape. The house groaned again. Floorboards flexed like lungs. Paint peeled from the walls in curled strips, revealing words underneath. Names written over and over in a script that spiraled like a whirlpool. Some were familiar. Jonah, Hale, Cranley. But others, Lena didn't recognize, and yet they rang through her like long, lost memories. She tried to read them aloud, but the moment she opened her mouth, her tongue refused to move. The sound stuck in her throat, coiled and writhing like something alive. Then came the banging. Not from the red door, but from below. She jumped. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, her pulse spiked. The banging was forceful, violent, like fists against metal. It rose through the floorboards with frantic energy, a trapped rhythm of panic and rage. Then a scream, raw and distant, like it came from miles beneath her feet. She crawled toward the center of the room. The boards beneath her trembled. The floor was no longer wood, but something like flesh stretched thin over bone. As she laid her hand on it, warmth bloomed through her fingers, a fevered heat that made her feel dizzy like breathing steam. She whispered, "Who's there?" And the house answered, not in words, but with a memory. Suddenly she was a child again, 5 years old, standing in the woods behind her grandmother's house. The air was thick with mist. Trees loomed like crooked statues. She followed the sound of a chime, soft like a music box submerged in water. The chime led her to a circle of stones, black and smooth, each one pulsing with a low vibration she felt through her shoes. In the center of the circle, something breathed. She couldn't see it, but she felt it watching her. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her ears. "Don't listen to it. It can't take you if you don't listen." But she had listened. She always listened. The memory snapped like a rubber band. Lena gasped. Back in her room, her hands still on the floor. Her heart pounding. She understood now. This wasn't the first time she'd heard the house. It had been following her since childhood, threading itself through lullabies and whispered tales, blooming in the silence between words. Her grandmother had known. Her entire family had known. They hadn't warned her because it was inevitable. The bloodline had already been marked. She looked at the red door. It throbbed gently now, as if in rhythm with her heartbeat. The bone handle gleamed. Something shifted behind it. A shadow pacing, waiting. She should have been afraid, but she wasn't. Not anymore. Because she'd begun to understand the house. The whispers weren't curses, they were instructions. Every distortion in the recordings, every echo, every backward phrase was a blueprint. A ritual. The house wasn't trying to consume her. It was trying to speak through her. It was using her voice as a mouthpiece, her breath as its windpipe, her bones as antenna. And the more she resisted, the more it screamed. But now she was listening. She turned on the recorder again. Her hand didn't shake. "This is tape 13. I think I've misunderstood what the house is." She paused. The static behind her voice pulsed, almost pleased. "I thought it was a place. But it's more like a wound, a rift. Something left open, festering, echoing across every place that's ever gone silent too long. I don't think Jonah opened it. I think he became it. And I think I'm next." A slow thump echoed from the wall. Then another, and another. She stood, walked to the red door, wrapped her hand around the bone handle. She didn't turn it. Not yet. Because the house wasn't done talking. The ceiling cracked overhead, dust sifting down in slow spirals. The walls began to flex inward, like the room was exhaling. Her shadow peeled off the floor and drifted upward, no longer attached to her, no longer following. It stood before the red door, watching her with featureless patience. Then it reached for the handle and smiled. And for the first time in days, Lena spoke clearly, her voice strong. "I'm ready to hear the rest." The house sighed, and the door began to open. It didn't burst open. It didn't explode, splinter, or scream. The red door opened slowly, quietly, like a child waking in the dark, not quite sure if the nightmare is still real. The air that spilled out wasn't cold. It was thick, wet, and warm like breath against skin. It smelled of copper and soil, like fresh blood spilled into a rain-drenched grave. Lena didn't flinch. She didn't move at all. The house had hollowed out her fear. What stood in its place now was something else entirely. Curiosity sharpened into obedience. The room tilted, not literally, but in her perception. Like gravity shifted sideways, dragging the floor down toward the door's yawning darkness. And from that dark, something stepped through. It wasn't a figure in the traditional sense. It was shaped like a person, but not bound by the rules of bodies. It had limbs that bent too far and skin that shimmered like the surface of oil in sunlight. No eyes, no mouth, but the sound it carried in its wake, that was unmistakable, static layered with screams. A crackling, warbled chant that sounded like 10 voices speaking at once, trying to harmonize and failing. And underneath it all, a familiar hum. The same hum from the tape. The same hum that had followed her since the beginning. Lena stared into the space it left behind as it moved, watching the way the walls warped around it, paint bubbling, the floor dampening with every step. It wasn't here to chase her. It didn't have to. The house had already drawn her in. And now, the thing that came through the door, It didn't come to hurt her. It came to meet her. And when it stood in front of her, head tilted slightly, she felt something shift inside her ribs. Not fear. Recognition. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, the echo did. That warbling, vibrating sound that had started in her teeth now filled the room, pouring from her lips like vapor. The thing that had crossed over through the door responded in kind, its chest pulsing, its form twitching in a rhythm that matched her breathing. It wasn't a monster. It was a message. She fell to her knees. The air thinned, not from lack of oxygen, but because the house was listening. Every wall pressed inward, closer, trembling with anticipation. Lena reached into her pocket and retrieved what she didn't remember placing there, the last piece of Jonah's notebook. Pages fused together with what looked like old blood, symbols twisted into margins, and a phrase repeated a dozen times. When the door opens, speak nothing. Let it remember you first. The creature, if it could be called that, leaned forward. No eyes, no mouth, just presence. It raised a long, segmented arm and placed a hand, not a hand something, on Lena's head, and just like that, she was gone. Not physically, not erased, but Lena wasn't inside herself anymore. She saw the inside of the house, not the rooms, not the floorboards. The real house. The one buried beneath Briar Falls, its black roots stretching through time, threading into the dreams of children, the quiet of dying old men, the static in forgotten radio stations. The house was an infection, and everyone who heard the tape was a host, a carrier, the voice of something that couldn't speak on its own, not yet. Not fully. But Lena was a doorway now, and doorways remember. She saw the first sacrifice. A child tied beneath the floorboards in 1806, his mouth sewn shut, his chest carved with sigils that bled until the house began to sing. She saw generations that followed, preachers, mothers, poets, soldiers, all of them infected by sound, called back by the frequency. Some resisted, some begged, but all eventually opened. Jonah hadn't been lost. Jonah had been chosen, and Lena had been born from the house's call. Her family line was a blood channel, a pipeline for voices that had no throats. And now it was her turn. The creature, no, the echo, placed its other hand on her chest. She didn't scream. She exhaled. And all the voices that had clawed at her walls, all the shadows behind the mirror, all the names in the dust, they sang. A song with no melody, a chant without words. It was a sound designed to undo. Every crack in the floor widened. The paint ran upward. The ceiling bloomed with eyes. Time warped, collapsed, rewound. She saw herself from behind 100 versions, looping and flickering, all standing at the edge of the red door, all reaching, all screaming, all listening. And the house whispered to every single one, "Now you know what you are." Lena gasped, as though surfacing from deep water. The creature was gone. The red door sealed shut, the air cleared, and she, finally, truly understood. She hadn't been trapped. She'd been prepared. The real horror wasn't what came through the door. It was that the door had always been inside her, and now it was open. Wide open. Forever. There was no silence anymore. Not truly. Not ever again. Even when the room stood still. Even when the red door sealed shut and the creature, the echo, retreated back into the folds of unreality it had come from, the noise persisted. But it wasn't just in the walls now. It wasn't trapped in the old wood or floating behind the mirror like smoke. It was inside Lena, threaded into the marrow of her bones. It moved when she moved, breathed when she breathed, hummed in perfect cadence with her pulse, a sound without origin, a song without source, and it didn't stop. At first, she thought she'd gone deaf. The room around her, quiet, still. The old bed didn't creak. The light bulb in the ceiling didn't buzz. The wind didn't moan through the cracked glass. But that's what terrified her the most. The absence of external sound made what lived inside her scream louder. The vibrations in her skull, the murmuring from the back of her tongue, the soft, repeating chant inside her brain that whispered not in words, but in frequencies. She understood them. Somehow, like she'd always known them but forgotten how to hear. Each note carried meaning, not sentences, not dialogue. Commands. She rose slowly from the floor, her legs shaking as though she hadn't used them in weeks. Her shadow was gone again. Not cast by the flickering lamp overhead, not dragging across the floor with her movements. And yet, it still watched. She could feel it just beyond her line of sight. It had become her companion now, that sentient absence, the thing that mirrored her only when it chose to. The tape recorder still sat on the desk, undamaged, waiting. She didn't remember setting up a fresh cassette, but there it was, wound tight, labeled with a word she hadn't written. Inheritance. Her hands moved before her mind agreed. She pressed record. The red light blinked, and she began to speak, though the words didn't feel like her own. This is tape 14. I think I've figured it out. The house creaked. Not with age, with attention. She continued, voice low, strangely steady. It's not haunted. That word's too small. What's here? It doesn't wear sheets or slam doors. It doesn't rattle chains or leave bloody messages on mirrors. It resonates. It changes what you are. It grows in the empty spaces, feeds on what you forget and echoes what you can't admit. Her lips cracked into a dry smile, not from humor but because something inside her laughed. Not loud, not cruel, just patient. It was never about the red door, or Jonah, or even me. This house isn't the source. It's the speaker, the broadcast point. And we're just the receivers. The sound in her chest vibrated harder at that, like it approved. She stopped the recording. The moment the click echoed in the room, the tape ejected on its own. No power, no electricity, no mechanical reason. It simply obeyed. Lena took the cassette out. It was warm, almost pulsing. She slipped it into her pocket and looked around. Something had shifted. Again. The floor had warped overnight. Where once there were rotting wooden planks and old carpet, now there was a long line of teeth pressed into the wood. Not real teeth. Not human. But the impression of a bite, like something massive had taken a slow, deliberate mouthful of the floor, and the house hadn't bothered to heal. Behind her, the mirror hadn't cracked, but it no longer showed her. Not fully. It showed her shape, yes, her movements, but not her face. In the reflection, her head was always turned away, or shrouded in fog, or missing entirely. And when she leaned closer, she noticed something standing beside her, just beyond the glass. Thin, smiling, blurred like a figure captured mid-motion in an old photograph. The sound inside her changed. It became rhythmic, measured. Not speech, not melody, but a beat. A code, knock, pause, knock, knock, pause, knock, Morse. She remembered it from an old high school class. Her body moved without her, scribbling on the wall with the tip of a broken pencil. Leave. Leave. Lena laughed, dry, hysterical. Now you want me to leave? She asked aloud. The ceiling groaned in response. The sound shifted again. Urgent. Leave. Now, but where would she go? There were no doors anymore, no windows that led outside. The world beyond the glass was wrong, twisted hills, skies that blowed upward, shadows without bodies that drifted like fog. The house had stopped pretending to be part of the world. It was showing her what it truly was now. A rift, a throat, a speaker broadcasting madness through anyone who dared to listen. The real world, the town, the people, felt like memories someone else had left behind. Lena could barely recall the face of the woman who rented her this room. The shop below. Was it even still there? The more she tried to remember, the less solid it felt. But the house remembered everything. And now it wanted her to carry its message further. She looked down at her hands. New veins pulsed beneath her skin. Black, not blue. Her fingertips vibrated when she touched anything, like a tuning fork pressed to the surface of reality. She didn't know what she was becoming, but she understood why. The sound had no mouth of its own. It needed a vessel, and she was listening. She picked up the next blank tape. No label. Not yet. She pressed record and didn't speak. Just let the room do the talking. Let the sounds come. From beneath the floor, something breathed. From the walls, something wept. From the mirror, something moved. And from inside Lena, the sound without a source began to sing. Not a melody, not yet. But soon. Very, very soon. There was a new room in the house. Lena hadn't walked into it, hadn't opened a door or climbed a stair. She simply blinked, and it was there, where her reflection used to be, where her bed once stood, where the mirror had been shattered and mended and shattered again. The walls were the color of dried bone. The floor, a smooth black stone that reflected no light, only movement. The ceiling was too high to see, yet she could feel something watching from above. The air was heavy here, not with dust, not with time, but with attention. It pressed against her lungs like she was speaking beneath deep water. The listening room. That's what it called itself. Not with words, but with the sound that bloomed in her chest the moment she crossed its threshold. It wasn't a name spoken aloud, but conveyed through tone, through vibration, through the shifting of the space itself. The listening room didn't look like much. No windows, no doors, no furniture. Just a single reel-to-reel recorder in the center of the space, sitting atop a pedestal made of tightly bound wires and what appeared to be bones. Not decoration, not metaphor, real ones. The recorder wasn't plugged in. It wasn't attached to any power source. Yet the reels spun. Slowly, patiently, waiting. Lena approached. Each footstep echoed longer than it should have, as if the room savored sound, stretching it into forever. With each echo, the hum inside her grew louder. It was no longer just in her bones or teeth. It was in her blood now, in her breath, like she had swallowed the house itself, and now it whispered from inside her chest. She pressed record. The reels spun faster. The red light blinked to life. And then, without ever meaning to, Lena began to speak. I think I've crossed some threshold. Not physical. Not in space. In sound. I'm standing in a room that doesn't exist on any floor plan. But I hear it. I hear its shape, its walls, its purpose. The listening room isn't where the house hears us. It's where we hear the house. The moment the words left her mouth, the walls rippled. A low tremor passed beneath her feet. The room approved. She continued. There's a difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is passive. Listening is surrender. The people who disappear in this house, they didn't vanish. They listened too closely. Too well. The sound got in. The light above the recorder flared, bathing the room in a pulsing red glow. From every wall, a new sound emerged. Whispers layered in distortion. Children laughing, then screaming. A woman humming. A man sobbing. Footsteps running in circles. Each noise spiraled around Lena like wind caught in a storm drain. And then one sound rose above the rest. Her own voice. But not now. From before. From the first night. Playback from a recording she never saved. I can hear something in the walls. The voice repeated the phrase. Then again. Then it began to change, distorting, the cadence shifting until it was no longer a memory, but a question. Can you hear it? Can you hear it? Can you hear it? The reel-to-reel snapped to a halt. The room fell still, and the recorder spoke, not in words but in texture. The audio hiss turned rough, like sandpaper across skin. The reel groaned, and through the hiss came a frequency. Lena screamed, not from fear, but because the frequency reached inside her. Her body convulsed, her vision fractured. She saw things, impossible things, shapes that didn't obey geometry, spaces that folded into themselves, doorways that opened into screams. She dropped to her knees, clutching her ears. Blood seeped from her nose. Her skin shivered, crawling over her bones like it was trying to run. The frequency wasn't meant for humans. It was the house's true voice. And now it was teaching her. Visions exploded behind her eyes. A cathedral built underground, its walls lined with listening mouths. Rows of children sitting cross-legged before altars made of speakers, Their faces peeled back to expose raw ears, a staircase spiraling downward into silence so perfect it screamed. And at the bottom, a door made of mirrors, shaking, waiting. The house wanted her there, needed her there. She wasn't the first. But she would be the one to open what Jonah couldn't. The room shifted. Suddenly, Lena stood not in the listening room, but in a field. Wide. Empty. The sky overhead was a smooth, polished black, as if painted on with ink. In the distance stood the Marrow house, but not broken, not rotted. Whole. Pristine. Windows aglow with soft, golden light. Music poured from it, a lullaby she didn't recognize but somehow knew by heart. She walked forward. Each step echoed like thunder in the field's silence. As she approached the house, the lullaby distorted, slowed, then reversed. Notes unraveling into something far darker, far older. She reached the front steps and placed a hand on the door. It pulsed beneath her palm, then opened, and she woke up, back in the listening room. Alone, the recorder silent. But something was different now. The house had shown her its memory. It had spoken its truest language, and she had listened. She rose slowly, something wet dripping from her ears. Not blood this time. Ink, thick and black, pooling at her collarbone. Her vision still blurred, her mind still cracking like ice under too much weight. But the sound inside her was clearer than ever. It spoke a final phrase. Bring them to the threshold. Let them hear. Lena smiled. Because now she understood her role. She wasn't the sacrifice. She was the invitation. Lena left the listening room without walking. She didn't remember how her legs moved, or if they moved at all. One moment she stood beside the dead recorder, ink drying on her neck. The next, she was in the hallway. Her hallway, though it had changed. The wallpaper had peeled back in long, curling strips, revealing words underneath, etched deep into plaster. Names she didn't recognize, dates long past, all written in the same steady, deliberate hand. The carpet was soaked. Not with water, but something thicker. She didn't look down to see what it was. She didn't need to. Because the house was guiding her now. It no longer whispered. It no longer needed to. The message had rooted itself inside her, bloomed like mold across the hollow spaces of her thoughts. She felt it when she blinked, when she breathed. And now it had given her a task. She had to invite someone in. The voice hadn't said who, but Lena knew. Just as she had known where to find the red door, just as she had known how to read the symbols in Jonah's notebook without ever learning them. She knew now who the house had chosen. The first one. The first to hear what waited behind the walls. And the strange thing was, she wasn't afraid for them. She was envious. The hardware store below was dark. Dust clung to the aisles like moss. Most of the shelves had been empty for weeks. There hadn't been customers in months. Lena hadn't even seen the shopkeeper since the first week she arrived, but as she descended the creaking stairs, the lights overhead buzzed to life. One by one, all on their own. Waiting. She moved through the store in silence, the hum beneath her skin guiding her like a leash. At the back, past the splintered wood and rotting paint, was a door marked private. She'd never opened it before. She hadn't needed to. The message hadn't ripened yet. Now it had. She reached for the handle, and the hum surged. A vibration bloomed in her jaw, down her throat, across her ribs. It was a kind of ecstasy, a devouring. Behind the door, she heard breathing. Human, shallow, unaware. She opened it. The room beyond was small, just a back office. Cluttered with ledgers and old supply invoices, a desk buried beneath papers. A single chair sat in the corner, and in it, sleeping, or pretending to sleep, was Garrett. She remembered him now. He'd handed her the key when she arrived, muttered something about not staying too long, kept to himself since then. But he hadn't left, hadn't moved, just stayed up here, behind this door, sitting in that chair like he was waiting for something he couldn't name. Lena stepped inside. He didn't look up at first, just muttered, eyes half-lidded, "They told me not to talk to you." Lena said nothing. The sound inside her pulsed again. Garrett's head twitched. They said once you started hearing it, it was already too late, that you'd bring the noise with you. Still, she said nothing. He finally met her eyes, and something inside him broke. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His lips trembled, as if trying to hold back a scream he hadn't even thought of yet. And Lena, with the hum singing behind her ribs, stepped forward. "It's not noise," she said, her voice like smoke, like silk caught in a fire. "It's the invitation, and you've been listening since before you were born." She reached into her coat and pulled out a cassette tape. The label read simply "Hear Me." She placed it on the desk in front of him. Garrett stared at it like it was a weapon. "I don't want to," he said. Lena tilted her head. "You already have." And then she turned, left the room, closed the door. She didn't need to stay. She knew what would happen. He would wait, maybe a few hours, maybe a day, but eventually he'd press play, because they always do, and the house would sing again, through him, into him, around him. One by one, the chorus would grow. That night, back in her room, Lena sat in the middle of the floor. The red door had reappeared. It no longer hid or whispered. It stood open now, just a sliver, enough to leak a breeze that smelled of iron and old rain, enough to let the sound seep through. She stared at it, waited, and in the dark the hum shifted again, not a command, not a warning, a welcome. She closed her eyes and smiled. Garrett didn't sleep that night, not because of nightmares. No, he hadn't dared close his eyes. He'd sat in the office chair until his back ached and his legs went numb. The cassette Lena had left perched on the desk in front of him like a dare. Its label, "Hear Me," seemed to shimmer faintly under the flickering overhead light. He wanted to throw it away, wanted to crush it under his boot, to burn it, to forget the pale girl with dark eyes who had entered his office without knocking. But most of all, he wanted to press play, and that terrified him, because something deep inside him already knew what was on it. He'd heard it before, once, years ago. A fragment. A static, written clip that drifted across the AM band one night while he twisted the dial, unable to sleep. He didn't remember what it said, just the way it made him feel. Like something had looked at him from inside the radio and smiled. He turned it off, left the house, moved to Briar Falls thinking he'd buried it behind him. But he hadn't buried anything. He'd been called here, and now the sound had found him again. At precisely 3:17 a.m., the light bulb above his desk exploded. Not a flicker, not a dimming, just a sudden pop, followed by glass raining over the desk in slow, perfect arcs. The tape didn't move, but it felt heavier somehow, like it had drawn in the darkness and swelled from it. Garrett picked it up with trembling fingers. He stared at the tiny spools, the wound magnetic tape inside, the label, still handwritten, still soaked at the edge with something dark. He realized the smudges weren't ink. The tape had blood. Just a drop. Just enough. His thumb hovered over the play button. He told himself this was just to hear what was on it, just to be sure. He pressed play. The sound that emerged wasn't human. Not entirely. It began with a low rumble, like the roar of something ancient trapped beneath miles of stone. Then the tape screeched, high, piercing, like metal screaming as it was dragged across teeth. Garrett clutched his ears, but it was inside him now. In his head, in his blood. A voice emerged from the noise. Familiar. Lena, you've always listened, Garrett, even when you pretended not to. Do you remember the first dream? The voice in the tree, the hollow beneath your bed. He stumbled back. The recorder clicked, but the tape kept spinning. She continued, you thought it was gone. But it waits. The sound waits in silence, inside every second you ignore. But now you hear it again. You can't unhear it. The room darkened. Not dimmed, darkened. Like the walls themselves absorbed the light. Shadows peeled away from corners, growing longer, reaching. And then the voice changed. It layered, grew deeper, became we. We are breath made sound. We are the voice inside your silence. The house knows you. It remembers you. Garrett fell to his knees. He screamed, not out of pain, but recognition. And then the bleeding started. From the corners of the tape deck, from the seams in the desk, from the wood beneath his knees. Thick, black liquid that pulsed with every word Lena had spoken. It formed lines, then shapes. Symbols burned into the office floor like fire underwater. And all around him, the sound became rhythm. The hum, the chant, the invitation. When the recorder finally stopped, Garrett didn't move. He sat in the center of the symbols, eyes wide, lips parted, whispering to someone who wasn't there. Or maybe someone who was. And from upstairs, through the floorboards and into Lena's bones, the house sang back. Because Garrett had pressed play. And that's all the house ever needed. One press, one ear, one willing passenger. Back in her room, Lena was already preparing the next tape. There would be more. There were always more. The house had opened, but not all at once. It opened like skin under a slow knife, layer by layer, doorway inside doorway, sound stitched into sound. Lena had come to understand that now. The red door was never the true threshold. That was just the invitation. The first step. The hallway she now stood in, if it could still be called a hallway, was the spine of something far older, older than the town, older than Jonah, older than human noise. The air here was different. Denser. It shimmered, not with heat, but with intent. Every breath she took sounded louder than it should. Her footsteps didn't echo. They answered. The corridor twisted, long and narrow, its walls pulsing with a faint glow beneath the surface, as if something alive moved just beneath the paint. She didn't know how long she'd been walking. Time no longer behaved itself here. Minutes stretched into hours, or collapsed into heartbeats. All Lena knew was that the deeper she went, the more her body hummed. She didn't need the recorder anymore. She was the recorder now. Her veins thrummed with feedback. Her bones rang with resonance. The house had made her hollow, and now it poured its voice through her. She stopped at the end of the hall, where the walls seemed to breathe inward, narrowing until they pressed close against her shoulders. Before her stood another door, but this one was wrong. It had no handle, no hinges, no lock. Just a circle carved into the surface, ringed with teeth, real teeth, yellowed and cracked, each one pulsing faintly, as if chewing something only the house could taste. Above it, a word was etched, not in any language Lena had learned, but she read it anyway. Within, she reached out and placed her palm in the center of the door. It was wet, not just damp, wet like skin slick with fever sweat. The moment her hand made contact, the door shuddered, the teeth flexed, and then it opened, not outward, not inward, but through itself, folding reality like fabric. The world behind it bled out slowly, not darkness, but a total absence of shape, a black that devoured perspective. But in that nothingness, sound bloomed. Raw, endless, pure. It wasn't noise. It was memory. Every voice the house had ever consumed poured out in one long, aching wail. Lena heard them all at once. Children sobbing lullabies, old men praying through broken teeth, women laughing as they sank into the floor, and then beneath them, steady, rhythmic, patient, Jonah's voice. "I told you it remembers," he whispered. "I told you it doesn't forget." Lena stepped through. She didn't walk. She didn't float. She simply passed. The inside of the door wasn't a room. It wasn't even a place. It was a recording made of flesh and light and memory. A library of human voices stored in impossible shapes. Faces twisted into the ceiling. Hands reaching from the walls. Clawing toward microphones that hung like meat from the dark. Everything pulsed with breath. Everything trembled with sound. This was the true core of the house. Not wood, not brick, not rot. This was the throat. Lena understood now why the sound needed carriers. Why the house had never spoken directly. It didn't have a voice of its own. It was a parasite of resonance. It fed on emotion. Pulled it through mouths, through microphones, through ears too willing to listen. It had built itself a body from the voices of the missing, and now it needed lungs. It had chosen hers. The sound rose again like a storm rolling over the sea. The air grew heavy. Her limbs convulsed. The chorus began to swell, every voice chanting the same three words, not in unison, but in desperate, overlapping rhythm: let us through. She couldn't tell whether they were asking her, begging her, or warning her. Her body arched backward. Her mouth opened wide, wider than it should. Her jaw cracked, her spine bowed. The sound poured out, not in words but in color. The world bent, and from the center of the room, a figure stepped forward. Jonah, but not Jonah. His eyes were gone, sewn shut with recording tape. His skin was pale, translucent. Symbols pulsed just beneath the surface, glowing in time with the sound. His voice didn't come from his mouth. It came from everywhere. You opened the first door. Now open the last. She tried to speak, but her throat wasn't hers anymore. You are the invitation, he said, but the next one must be the door. Lena collapsed to her knees. Behind her, the teeth-lined doorway closed. She felt the shift again. Back to the house. Back to the walls, back to the room above the hardware store. But the room wasn't the same. Garrett was gone. In his place, a new tape, labeled in her own handwriting, Threshold. And on the floor, drawn in wet black ink, was a new symbol. A circle within a circle. A door inside a door. The next stage had begun, and the house was still hungry. Lena didn't press play. Not immediately. The new tape, Threshold, sat on the floor in front of her, glistening slightly like the ink was still wet. Like the sound inside it hadn't finished cooling. She stared at it for what could have been minutes or hours. Her body limp with exhaustion and her mind barely holding together beneath the pressure of what she'd just seen. She could still feel the inside of that door, behind her eyes, the moving walls, the mouths, the song that wasn't a song but a need. Her ears rang with it, that chorus of desperate voices pleading to be let through. Not out of cruelty, not out of vengeance, but because they didn't want to be alone in there anymore. They wanted to continue. The house had shown her its truth, and the truth was loneliness. That was the deepest horror in the hum, in the whispering walls and red doorways. It wasn't rage. It was abandonment. Whatever the house had once been, whatever the thing inside it truly was, it had been left behind. Forgotten. It had filled that silence with people, with memory, with noise. It wasn't just feeding. It was begging to be remembered. And now it wanted Lena to speak for it. But before she could decide what to do with the new tape, she noticed something strange. The sound inside her had stopped. Not gone. Not silent. Paused. The hum that had been her constant companion since the red door first appeared. The low throb that had nestled itself behind her sternum was no longer there. Not humming, not vibrating, just still. And somehow, that emptiness was more terrifying than the noise itself. She pressed her hands to her chest, half expecting to find a hole there. But there was nothing. No warmth, no rhythm, no echo. That's when she realized the house was waiting. It had never done that before. The house always moved first. Creaking, whispering, knocking. It had always been the one to break the silence. But now, it was holding its breath. Lena stood slowly, her knees stiff and aching. The floor beneath her feet felt cold in a new way. Not physical cold, but emotional, like standing on the edge of a decision you know you can't take back. The silence was watching her. She picked up the tape. It was warm. Not from use, from presence. She didn't know what would happen if she played it. Not exactly. But deep down, she suspected this was the crossing. Not the red door. Not the corridor. Not even the listening room. This. Pressing play. She carried it to the recorder and slid it in. But her fingers hesitated on the button. Because part of her remembered something Jonah had said in the darkness of that other place. When the symbols glowed beneath his skin and his voice came from everywhere. You're the invitation. But the next one must be the door. She was no longer just the receiver. She was the transmitter now. She wasn't meant to hear the sound anymore. She was meant to carry it. She pressed play. The tape didn't begin with static, or distortion, or even a voice. It began with nothing. A silence so pure it pierced. Not absence of sound, but the removal of all permission for it. Lena's ears screamed in protest. Her body trembled, every cell yearning for something, anything, to fill the void. The world blurred. The lights dimmed. And then she heard breathing. Not on the tape. Behind her. She turned slowly. No one was there. But the door to her room, the normal one, the one that used to lead to the hallway, was open. She hadn't opened it. It hadn't existed in days. Weeks. Time had collapsed in this place. But now it stood wide, and beyond it a hallway. Bright. Clean. Familiar. It was the hallway from her first day in Briar Falls. The very first night. Before the tape. Before the hum. Before the house revealed its voice. And in that hallway stood a man. Not Garrett. Not Jonah. A stranger. Early 20s. Messy hair. A camera bag slung across his shoulder. He looked confused, like he just stepped off a bus, and realized he was somewhere he didn't mean to be. His eyes met hers, and she knew he had heard the sound. Not all of it, not yet, but just enough, just a sliver of it, maybe through a shared file, maybe through a corrupted upload, maybe through one of her old podcast episodes she'd left online before things began to shift. However it happened, it didn't matter. The house had found him, and it had used Lena to open the door. Not the door, his door. He stepped inside. Lena tried to speak, to warn him, but her mouth didn't open. Her body didn't move, because the silence wasn't watching her anymore. It was watching him, and through it, she understood. This was the next one. The sound had passed through her. She had delivered the invitation. And now the house would begin again. The red door would find his room. The hum would enter his bones. And when it did, the silence would break, and the sound would grow. The man didn't speak. Not when he stepped through the doorway. Not when his eyes met Lena's. Not even when the light above him dimmed and the air thickened with that same slow, rotting pressure she remembered from her own first moment inside the house. He just stood there, breathing, blinking, processing. Lena watched him the way you might watch someone standing on the edge of a frozen lake, unaware the ice beneath their feet has already begun to crack. He took another step. The door behind him didn't close. It vanished. One blink and it was gone, as though it had never been there. And that's when Lena noticed it. The hum had returned. But it wasn't inside her anymore. It lived in him now. She felt it before he did. Saw it in the way he tilted his head slightly, like something faint had brushed his eardrum. His hand moved unconsciously to his temple, fingertips twitching with discomfort. Lena recognized the moment well, the first symptom, the vibration that hides beneath thought, disguised as fatigue or memory, or the distant throb of an old headache. Most people ignore it, dismiss it. But once you notice it, it never goes away. It waits, grows. Do you hear it? Lena asked. Her voice startled him. He looked at her like someone waking from a long dream. What? She didn't repeat herself. She didn't have to. His face had already answered. He'd heard something, felt something, and now it had his attention. The house always started with attention. He stepped farther into the room. Every footfall came down just a fraction of a second too late, as though sound itself was dragging behind reality. That's how it began to twist the mind. Imperceptible timing shifts, barely enough to notice at first. The human brain hated disorder, and the house knew it. It didn't need to haunt. It only needed to adjust. Lena stepped aside as he walked past. He didn't acknowledge her again, drawn instead to the tape recorder still running, still spinning the threshold tape, though no sound came from it. He crouched in front of it, squinting. "What is this?" he asked. "It's yours now," Lena said. His head turned sharply, brows pinching. "What? The sound," she said. "You've heard it. Just a piece. A sliver. But that's enough." That's how it begins. 8 seconds. That's all it needs. He stood again, slow. I don't understand. You will, she said gently, almost with pity. We all do. After the 8th second, it stops being something you heard. It becomes something you are. She pointed toward the walls. The wallpaper was curling again, revealing new names beneath it, names neither of them had written. Names Lina hadn't seen before. But his name was among them now. She didn't know it until she saw it spelled out in long, thin letters. Adrian. Adrian backed away from the wall. What is this place? Why did you bring me here? I didn't, Lina said. I'm not the one calling anymore. He froze. Calling. Lina nodded. It wants you. That's how it finds us. One by one. Through a breath, a file. A radio broadcast at 2:43 a.m. A dream your mother forgot to forget. It gets in. It waits. Then it pulls you here. I don't want to be here. No one does. Adrian stepped toward the doorway. The place it had been, where he'd entered. It was still gone. Only smooth wall remained. Pulsing slightly with that same almost sound Lina had grown to recognize anticipation. He reached out. Pressed his hand against it. There has to be a way out. There is, she said, but not back. He turned, anger rising in his voice. You're insane. Lina didn't argue. What would be the point? The house liked resistance. Resistance sharpened the signal. He stormed toward the window. Tried to open it. It didn't move. He didn't notice that there was no glass, just the reflection of himself staring back, and behind that reflection, something moving. A shape, a shift. A suggestion of fingers dragging along the inside of a mirror. The house had begun listening to him now. Lina could feel it. The walls leaned closer. The floor hummed beneath his feet, not hers. The air thickened around his breath. This was his crossing. She had delivered him here, as the house had demanded, and now it no longer needed her. But it didn't discard her either, because once you've listened, once you've carried the message, you are the message. She was the archive now, the record, and Adrian was the speaker. She left him there, pacing the room, muttering to himself, as he began to hear the sounds that didn't come from the tape, as he began to feel the vibration in the spaces between his words, as he began to doubt which voice was his and which was the house's. She knew how long it would take. 8 seconds. That's what Jonah had said, and now she understood what he meant. 8 seconds from the first time you really hear it. That's all the house needs. She walked down the hall. The floor changed beneath her with every step, wood to carpet, to stone, to something soft and wet like moss over muscle. Each room she passed whispered to her, not in language but in memories that weren't hers. A woman sobbing in a room of candles. A child humming in a closet made of skin. A man trying to claw his way out of a floor that kept repairing itself. All of them listened. All of them changed. And now Adrian would too. She didn't feel guilt. Not anymore. She felt purpose. She had been hollowed out, filled, repurposed. The house had many doors, but only one voice. And Lina was learning how to speak it. Lina wasn't sure how long she'd been walking, only that the further she moved from Adrian, the less the house responded to her. It was subtle at first. The walls no longer pulsed to her steps. The floor didn't hum in her bones. Even the air felt distant, like it had shifted its weight to someone else. Adrian, of course. The house had turned its ear toward him now. She had delivered him across the threshold, his threshold. And with that, her role had changed again. She wasn't the listener anymore. She wasn't the speaker. Now, she was something else. She passed through a corridor lined with walls that breathed in and out like lungs. The floor thudded softly beneath her feet, each beat slower than the last, like the house's heart was sleeping, resting between screams. The lights above didn't flicker anymore. They bloomed and dimmed in long pulses, like eyes trying to open underwater. And in that dimness, Lena felt quieter. It wasn't silence. No, not here. Silence didn't exist in this place. Even the absence of sound had a texture to it, a low vibration, like pressure on the back of the teeth. It was the space between heartbeats, between breaths, the pause between knocking and the door opening. That's where she lived now. In the pause. Then she heard it, a new voice. It wasn't Adrian's, it wasn't hers, and it wasn't the house. It was second, like a copy of a copy. A reflection that blinked when you didn't. It echoed through the walls, not as sound, but as memory forced into her head. A scream without volume. A name she had never learned and somehow always known. She turned a corner and found herself in front of a new door. Not red, not bone-handled. This one was thin and tall, made entirely of mirrors fused together at odd angles. It reflected nothing properly. Her body stretched wrong in its surface, her limbs bent backward, her eyes missing. Behind her reflection stood a version of herself, smiling. Mouth too wide, no skin on the left side of her face. The second voice whispered from behind the mirror, "You listened too soon." Lena stared. "Who are you?" The mirror. Lena didn't answer, but the voice did. "I was the first, the almost." The mouth that formed before the breath. I opened the wrong door, and then Lena saw it, flashes behind the glass. Not reflections. Memories. A woman standing in a subway tunnel, holding a tape recorder. A man in a 1970s broadcast booth, tearing off his headphones with blood leaking from his ears. A child holding a shell to his head, screaming as if the ocean inside had spoken back. They were not chosen. They were accidents. And the sound had touched them too early, entered before the host was ready. Before the house had tuned them to its frequency. It had broken them instead, bent their timelines, split their reflections, scattered them through mirrors and static and half remembered dreams. These were the false starts, the corrupted tracks, the early echoes. The second voice was their guardian, their archivist. Lena pressed her hand against the mirrored door. It felt like ice, and yet it burned. The voice continued, "You're not the first to carry the invitation, but you were the first to speak it properly. You balanced the signal. You let the sound reshape you without tearing." Lena's chest tightened. "What happens now?" "Now," the voice said, "you begin to record what hasn't happened yet." The mirror split down the middle with a soft hiss, revealing a spiral staircase made of rusted metal and radio wire. It descended into blackness, the steps pulsing faintly with violet light. Each stair hummed a single note, ascending in pitch the deeper they went. Lena stepped forward. As she did, the mirrored version of herself walked backward into the glass, vanishing like a memory trying to forget itself. With each step downward, Lena felt her thoughts rearranging. Memories flickered, half-formed, out of order. Her 5th birthday, the inside of her grandmother's radio, a scream she hadn't released yet, a door she hadn't opened yet, a voice that hadn't been born yet. The stairs led to a chamber of speakers, hundreds of them, all different sizes, all stacked and wired into a pulsing, living wall of black cones and red wires. In the center stood a microphone, old, cracked, waiting. Lena understood. She was to speak now, not what had happened, but what would. The sound needed futures, new recordings, new thresholds. The house wasn't just a wound to be remembered. It was a wound to be passed on, and she was its narrator. She stood before the mic, closed her eyes, and began to speak. "I see the next door, in a city where no radios work anymore. I see a boy who hums in his sleep, and his parents start dreaming of drowning. I see a woman who listens to an old cassette left on a stranger's grave. I see another Garrett, another Adrian. I see me in 100 mirrors, all screaming at once." Behind her, the speakers began to play back her voice. But not just in the room. Everywhere, the broadcast had begun, and the second voice, her future self, her failed self, her guide, whispered once more, "This is how the house spreads." And the sound grew. It started remembering her before she even arrived. The moment Lena stepped off the final stair, the chamber shifted. It didn't just echo with her voice anymore. It anticipated it. The words she hadn't spoken yet floated like mist in the air. hanging just behind her teeth. The room was vast and circular, a black cylinder carved from something older than stone. It pulsed softly, a slow rhythm like a sleeping lung. Wires crawled along the floor like vines, threading between scattered speakers, broken TVs, rusted tape decks, cracked vinyl. The room wasn't built, it was gathered. Like the house had scavenged every device that could carry sound, every obsolete machine that once meant something to someone, and buried it here, in the pit of itself. Lena walked in silence, though silence didn't exist in this place. There was always something, a breath, a click, a pulse behind the walls. And now, as she moved, the machines flickered to life, not all at once, but in sequence, as though watching her. As though recognizing her, the speakers played fragments. Oh, when she turned. It was her own voice, but wrong. He said the static never stopped after the third night. It's not sound. It's a key. It unlocks things. Each snippet was a memory, but not hers. These belonged to others, lost ones, the broken ones. The ones who hadn't made it through the 8th second. The house had recorded them all. Every failed vessel. Every mind that cracked under the pressure of the frequency. And now it was playing them back for her, like a warning. Or perhaps a tribute. Lena stopped in the center of the room. Before her stood a wall of reels, massive, spinning slowly, dragging black tape through ancient heads and rusted guides. The reels were huge, larger than her, humming softly as they fed the room's hunger, and behind the reels a mirror, but not a reflection, a recording of her face. She watched herself blink, tilt her head, speak without sound. Then the image flickered and she saw Adrian, then Garrett, then Jonah, then people she didn't know, people she hadn't met, would never meet. A woman screaming through a cracked walkie-talkie, a child carving symbols into their own tongue, a man whispering a song into the ear of a sleeping stranger. One by one, their faces dissolved into static, and each time the static cleared, Lena's own face returned. The room was telling her what she already feared. She was becoming all of them. Every vessel, every voice, every broken echo. Lena stepped closer to the real wall. Her hand brushed against the tape, fragile, humming with impossible warmth. Her fingers burned where they touched it, like the stories stored in the magnetic coils didn't want to be held. They wanted to be played. The room throbbed with light, and the air, thick and sweet and acrid, whispered again. Record what the others forgot. She knelt beside the oldest speaker in the room, one that looked like it had been built before words were written. She placed her mouth close to the cone, and she spoke. He's already hearing it. Adrian. The words weren't a prophecy. They were a confirmation. She could feel him unraveling upstairs, the frequency inside him growing teeth. He would either bend like she did, or snap like Jonah almost had. Either way, the house would record him. His memory would file itself into this room, coil up in these wires, whisper itself through old machines to the next voice that stepped across a threshold they didn't even know existed. She continued. The mirror will show him what he fears. The tape will play backwards the second time. The sound will whisper his name in his own voice. The reflection will smile first. The lights pulsed faster. The walls tightened. The floor breathed up through her knees. She was giving the house script, and it was hungry for it. But something shifted then, a flicker across the real wall. A new voice. Not one the house had gathered, not a memory, a live transmission. She heard Adrian scream, not in pain, in resistance. Then silence, not absence, not quiet, dead silence. The reels stopped. The lights froze. Lena stood slowly. Her breath caught in her throat. The house wasn't moving. It wasn't humming. It was stunned. Because Adrian had done something no one ever had. He'd stopped listening. He had rejected the signal. Lena felt her stomach twist. Because the house had never planned for that. It had planned for fear, for madness, for surrender, but not for defiance. The reel closest to her snapped. The tape unspooled, curling like a dying tongue on the floor. The room began to shake, and Lena realized with a jolt of cold terror. Adrian had broken the loop. The house was still hungry, but now it was starving. And the second voice inside Lena whispered what the house didn't want her to hear. Not all listeners obey. The house didn't breathe anymore. It strained. The air that had always moved with a slow, measured rhythm, like lungs inhaling centuries of silence, now pulled tight, held in place, like a scream trapped in the back of a throat that didn't know how to release it. Lena stood in the room that remembers, the reels around her unwinding in spasms, vomiting black tape like intestines unraveling across the floor. The speakers screeched, but no sound came out. Just the expression of sound, the gesture of a scream without a voice behind it, because Adrian had broken it. The loop that had fed this place, sustained it, evolved it through every willing listener, had cracked. Not shattered. Not yet. But something inside had skipped, and the house, for the first time in perhaps ever, didn't know what came next. Lena staggered back from the real wall as it warped. The tapes twitched, jumped, caught on themselves, dragging flickers of memory that didn't belong to her. Clips from lives the house was trying to remember, but couldn't finish. A woman leaping from a radio tower in Ohio. A preacher chanting into a well filled with ash. A janitor who burned every recording in the library basement before cutting his ears off with rusted scissors. The house was searching itself for stability, and failing. The ground lurched under her, not like a quake, but like a table with one leg suddenly gone. The walls bent inward, convulsing like a heartbeat turned arrhythmic. Lena had never imagined this place could feel confused, but that was the only word that fit. The house didn't just contain stories, it was story. And a story without rhythm was no longer a story. It was a threat. She scrambled up the spiral stairs, the rusted steps groaning beneath her as the walls trembled. Something behind her groaned. Not mechanical, not human. The voice of a place betrayed by its own pattern. She reached the top and stumbled back into the hallway, the one that had never existed until she believed it did. Everything up here looked different now. Wrong. Where before the rooms shifted like dreams, gracefully, purposefully, now they buckled. The wallpaper peeled in strips that revealed not names but holes. Jagged black holes that hissed without sound. The floor had begun to blister. Doors had become mirrors. Mirrors had become mouths. And at the far end of the hall, Adrian stood motionless, eyes wide, jaw clenched. Blood leaking from one nostril, his hands hanging limp at his sides. She called his name. No answer. Not even a flinch. He didn't blink. Didn't move. He was listening, but not to the house. To something else. She approached slowly. Each step was like dragging a body through mud. The air had thickened again, but not with sound. With something denser. With a presence that didn't belong here. Adrian's eyes were glassy, locked on the wall across from him, and carved into that wall, newly, messily, with the bleeding edge of a broken mirror, was a symbol Lena had never seen before. It pulsed. Not with sound, with absence. She reached for his arm. And the moment her fingers touched his skin, the house screamed. Not through the speakers, not through the mirrors, not even in her head, but inside the walls. A low, furious moan that pulsed once, then again, then roared into something primal. A noise that no ear was meant to catch. A noise that carried not just pain, but fear. The house was afraid. It was angry. Because Adrian had done the unthinkable. He'd reversed the signal. Lena stumbled back, clutching her chest as every nerve lit up like burning wire. Adrian turned to dry and turned. Not fast. Not suddenly. Just unnaturally. Like something remembering how to mimic a human. His movements weren't robotic, exactly. They were hesitant, confused. As if his muscles were no longer fully his, or as if they were being advised by something distant, unsure of the rules. His eyes met Lena's, and for a long, breathless second, she didn't see the house in them. No hum, no rhythm, no echo, just him, raw, present, and terrified. Then the mirror behind him rippled. It was floor to ceiling now, not just a pane or a fixture. A wall of reflection that hadn't been there moments ago, and shouldn't have existed in a place that devoured physics for fun. But it was here now, pulsing faintly, its surface bruised with veins of static, as though the glass itself was sick with memory. Lena knew what that meant. The house had recovered, partially. Recalibrated its story, trying to swallow Adrian again before he could sever the signal completely. It was adapting. She reached for him, but Adrian stepped back. "I saw it," he said softly, voice thin, like it had been used up. "I saw it without the sound." Lena's breath caught. "What?" "The inside. The place it doesn't want us to know about. The thing behind the voice." His eyes burned, not with possession, but fury. "It's not just feeding, it's copying us. Every time we speak into it, every time we scream or record or dream, it's building something from the parts. A version of us, a rehearsal. We're not just invitations, we're drafts." The mirror pulsed again. Lena looked at her own reflection. Except it wasn't her. Not quite. It was breathing wrong, blinking wrong, smiling, always smiling. The left side of its mouth hung open, twitching slightly like something alive waited just behind the cheekbone. Adrian stepped toward it. "It's trying to pull me back in. It wants to overwrite what I just did. But it can't, can it?" The mirror's light shifted, dimmed, brightened. A Morse code panic. "You broke the loop," Lena whispered. "No," he said. "I interrupted it. There's a difference." The floor beneath them pulsed, the walls thickening with every breath. The house was closing in again, resuming its familiar rhythm. But Lena could feel it. It wasn't as confident as before. There was static in its story now. Adrian had inserted contradiction, a flaw. And the house hated flaws. He walked up to the mirror, pressed his palm against the glass. It didn't ripple, didn't hum. It rejected him. The mirror had never refused a listener before. Adrian turned, voice rising. "It doesn't know what to do with refusal, with silence. You hear that? You parasite. I heard you. I listened. But I didn't obey. I didn't sing for you. And now you don't know what I am." The room dropped a few degrees. The lights dimmed. The very breath of the house slowed. Something was changing. And then, from deep inside the mirror, Lena's reflection opened its mouth wide, wider than anatomy allowed, and let out a sound that wasn't sound. It cracked the air. Time fractured for a moment. Adrian flinched but didn't fall. Lena screamed and dropped to her knees, and the mirror shattered, not from impact, from rejection. It imploded inward, sucking the imitation Lena into itself, dragging with it the static, the falsehood, the echo. A dozen distorted versions of her blinked and flickered as they were erased, each one screaming into void as they were pulled back into the nothing that created them. The sound collapsed, and for the first time in what felt like years, there was actual silence. No hum, no breathing walls, no vibrating floors. Just the sound of Lena's own heartbeat, wild in her ears. Adrian knelt beside her. "It's not gone, but now it knows we can refuse. We can interrupt the signal, force it to stop recording." Lena could barely process it, but she knew he was right. The house wasn't eternal. It only felt eternal because it had never been challenged. And now, 2 of its listeners had survived the 8th second. 2 of them had made it through without breaking. Behind them, the shattered mirror whispered its last breath. Glass shifting, settling. Then nothing. And somewhere deep below, in the room that remembers, one of the great reels stopped spinning. The story was no longer in the house's control. Now, it was in theirs. The house began to forget itself. At first, it was minor, barely perceptible to anyone who hadn't lived in its breath, who hadn't walked its lungs and slept in the gaps between its ribs. But Lena felt it instantly. The hum in the walls, once so ever present it became background noise to thought itself, began to hiccup. Tiny skips in rhythm. Pauses that felt like misplaced commas in a sentence the house had rehearsed for centuries. for a place that had once remembered every footstep, every breath, every scream etched into the grain of its floors and the sighs in its pipes. Forgetting was not just a wound. It was an unraveling, and Adrian saw it too. He stood beside her in the hallway, both of them trembling in the absence of sound. But it wasn't peace. It wasn't quiet. It was wrong. A silence too loud. A space where something should be, but wasn't. The kind of emptiness that made your ears strain for a hum that no longer existed. "The house doesn't know how to finish this part," Adrian said. His voice was low, cautious, but not fearful. "Not anymore." Lena nodded. "It's never had a script that stopped. Every listener before us, they gave it something to work with. A scream, a chant, a plea. But now we're not characters," Adrian said. "We're loose ends." That's when the house began to panic. Rooms that hadn't existed before started folding into each other. Hallways doubled back on themselves, then collapsed. Symbols bled from the wallpaper and crawled along the ceiling like frantic insects. Mirrors warped, melting into puddles of reflective oil, and most disturbingly of all, the names began to vanish. Not scratched out, not torn down, just gone. Every name that had been etched into the walls, carved into floorboards, whispered through speakers. All erased like they had never existed. The archive was collapsing. The house was trying to erase its own memory, the way a computer might try to reboot itself after a fatal error. Adrian moved through the chaos like a needle through a record, precise and unblinking. Lena followed, her body still catching up to the shift in her role. She had gone from vessel to transmitter, and now she was contagion. Not infected by the house, but carrying something foreign to it. Resistance, refusal, free thought. They passed through a room that had once been a chapel, before the house had twisted it into something hungrier. Now it was neither. The pews were overturned, the stained glass windows played nothing but static light, and the pulpit wept salt. At the center, nailed into the floor, was a speaker that kept stuttering the same 3 words, "WHO spiacus next." Lena didn't answer. She knew the trap. To respond was to be recorded, to be shaped, and the house was desperate now, trying to bait them into giving it new narrative. But they stayed silent, moving past it, through corridors that bled into each other, doorways that tried to redirect them back into loops that had already failed. And then, deep in the belly of the house, they found it. A door. But not like the red one. Not like the mirrored one. This door was simple. Wooden. Old. No symbols. No hum. Just a door like you'd find in any forgotten farmhouse, left half open in the wind. And behind it, wind. Not the stale, recycled breath of the house. Real wind. Cold and moving. Alive. Lena approached it first. "It's a trick," she whispered. Adrian shook his head. "No. It's the end." She turned to him. "How do you know?" "Because it doesn't remember what's on the other side," he said. "It can't shape what it can't remember. And right now, it doesn't remember us." Lena placed her hand on the doorknob. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cold. It just was. The most real thing in the house. And in that moment, she knew stepping through this door wouldn't just take them out of the house. It would remove them from its memory. They would become blanks. Ghosts to the house's system. Voices it couldn't replay. Names it couldn't recall. A kind of freedom no one else had ever achieved. But freedom has a cost. Behind them the house screamed, not loud. Not with rage, with grief. It grieved them, because it had begun to care. To shape itself around them. To record their fear and twist it into poetry. It had wrapped itself around their breath like a child clinging to a lullaby. But they had never sung, and now the melody was lost. Lena looked at Adrian. He nodded, and together, without a word, they stepped through the door. The wind met them like a song without lyrics. The house did not follow. It could not. Because for the first time in its long, hungry life, it forgot how. The wind hit them like memory, not the house's kind, the curated kind, cut and looped and played back until meaning collapsed, but real memory. unprompted, unscripted, alive. Lena staggered slightly as the door closed behind them, not slammed, not vanished, but simply shut, like a chapter ending on the last word of a sentence that refused to explain itself. She didn't turn around. Neither did Adrian, because the air ahead of them was wrong in all the right ways. They were outside, but not outside. The sky above wasn't familiar. It was a bruised blue, gray, dense and textured, like wet fabric hung across a glass ceiling. No stars, no sun, just movement. Constant, slow, unknowable movement, like something huge swam just beyond its surface. Clouds didn't drift. They crawled. The horizon stretched endlessly, curving upward instead of downward, like the land was coiled inside something larger. It wasn't a sky. It was a lid. Adrian muttered, "Where the hell are we?" Lena didn't answer. She was watching the ground, because it wasn't dirt beneath their feet. It was tape. Miles and miles of magnetic tape, curled and stretched and tangled like roots, looping endlessly across the landscape. Some of it twitched in the wind. Some of it remained coiled tightly in ancient, looking reels half, buried in the earth. Every now and then, a voice crackled through the strips, a whisper too distant to understand. The voices weren't speaking to them. They were searching. "I don't think we left," Lena finally said. "I think we stepped out of the story." Adrian crouched, running his hand along one of the thicker strands of tape. It vibrated under his touch, then fell still. "They're here," he said. "All of them. The ones the house recorded. The ones it failed to keep. They didn't vanish. They were exiled." The sky dimmed slightly. No sun, yet still darker. No moon, yet the shadows lengthened. In the distance stood a figure. It wasn't approaching. It wasn't waiting. It was listening. Tall, motionless, draped in what looked like layered sheets of static, the figure faced away from them. Its head tilted toward the sky like it was trying to hear something buried behind the clouds. Lena squinted, and something in her spine twisted, not from fear, but recognition. The figure was built from voices. Every inch of it, threads of conversation, weeping laughter breath, woven together into a shape. It didn't turn. It didn't need to. It knew they were here. Adrian stood. "Do you see it?" Lena nodded. "Yeah, but I don't think it's alive. I think it's a memory. One that didn't take." As if hearing her, the figure began to twitch. Not move, twitch. Like a cassette trying to rewind with no power. Jerked fragments of motion, stuttering backward. The air pulsed once, and Lena suddenly understood. This wasn't exile. It was limbo. This place wasn't a prison the house had built. It was the landfill it didn't want them to find. A junkyard of broken recordings. Discarded narratives, voices that refused to fit the structure. They hadn't escaped the house. They'd stepped into its shame. Adrian said it before she could. "We're in the beat side." Lena blinked. "The what?" He pointed to the horizon, where reels the size of buildings spun in slow circles, grinding against each other with a soundless rumble. "This is where the house buries what doesn't work. The rejected edits. The broken characters. The ones that escaped the loop. Like us." It made sense. Terrible, awful sense. The house hadn't stopped them. It had quarantined them. And it had done it so quietly, so gently, they hadn't even realized. Lena turned slowly in a circle. The landscape stretched on forever, cracked hills of rusted tape machines, fields of blinking lights, distant towers built entirely of speakers that faced inward in perfect circles. And beneath it all, the hum was back. But not the house's hum. This was older. Wounded. The sound of a system that didn't forget but also didn't know what to do with the things it couldn't use. A ghost hum. Lena dropped to her knees, gripping the coiled tape at her feet. "We didn't win," she said. "We didn't break it. We just broke out of it. And now we're here, wherever here is." Adrian sat beside her. His eyes were glassy, not with defeat, but with the beginnings of understanding. "So then what? We just wait for it to fade." She shook her head. "No, it doesn't fade. That's the problem. This place exists because it doesn't forget. That's why the reels keep turning. Why the voices still whisper. It's trying to rewrite us, reabsorb us. We're not free. We're just paused. A sound tore through the sky, low, long, deep, like a tape unspooling across 1,000 miles. The figure in the distance finally turned. Its face was a blur of mouths, all closed. Lena stood, because now she understood what they had to do. The house had forgotten them. But this place remembered everything. If they couldn't destroy the story from inside the house, maybe, just maybe, they could do it from the cutting room floor. They would unspool the B side and rewrite the ending themselves. The figure moved. Not fast, not slow, just inevitable, like gravity, like decay, like the part of the story that keeps happening, no matter how badly you want to rewrite it. Lena stood frozen as the patchwork of mouths on its face began to open, one by one, each lipless, silent, forming shapes that belonged to languages she'd never heard but instinctively understood. Not words, not commands, just intonation. The feeling of something being said that was not for you. Adrian stood beside her unmoving, jaw clenched so tightly she heard his teeth grind. "She's starting to edit," he whispered. Lena blinked. Who? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The sky answered for him. The bruised blue lid above them pulsed again, this time with stuttering flashes of light. Not lightning. Cuts. Edits. Whole chunks of sky blinked out and returned, but not in the same way. A moment ago there had been 3 clouds overhead. Now there were none. The hills shifted positions when she looked away. The horizon moved closer, even though they hadn't taken a single step. Something, or someone, was editing the landscape, and not from here. Adrian turned slowly, eyes wide. The house it's trying to overwrite this. How? Lena whispered. It forgot us. It forgot, but this place didn't. And if we're here, it can find us again. Through the pieces. The reels, the static, the discarded. Lena looked out over the terrain and saw it now. Dozens of broken scenes stitched into the land like badly patched skin. A child's room sunken into a ravine. A church bell suspended in air above a field of VHS tape. A bathroom mirror half buried in dirt, reflecting a sky that didn't match this one. Each fragment was a scene. Each scene was an attempt. Failed loops, collapsed trials, overwritten dreams. The house had tried to tell these stories once and then abandoned them. But not completely. This place was the graveyard of unworkable narrative. But now it was trying to salvage them. Merge the broken with the stable. Force a new script into being. And that figure in the distance, the stitched-together mouth-faced monument, was the narrator, the editor. Not alive, not dead, just assigned. Lena felt the ground tremble, not from motion, from instability, from doubt. "Come on," she said, grabbing Adrian's arm. "If it's trying to rewrite this place, we need to find the original cut." He frowned. "The what?" "The source," she snapped. "The first edit it made. The first time it realized it could control the story. If we find that, maybe we can undo it." Adrian hesitated. "This isn't a movie." "No," Lena said. "It's worse. It's a story that thinks it's alive." They moved fast, climbing over spools of ancient tape, ducking beneath antennae that hummed to no station, pushing past rusted broadcast towers that blinked with dying light. Every step made the air more fragmented. Time shivered. Some footsteps echoed before they were taken. Lena saw flashes of herself, different versions, shaking their heads, screaming silently, or vanishing just before impact. Echoes, failed edits, ghosts from the same script. The editor never followed. It didn't need to. It waited, because eventually stories returned to the page. They found it near what looked like the skeleton of a burned-out TV studio, a flat stone surface, scorched and cracked, with a single metal console in the center. The buttons were labeled with words that meant nothing until Lena read them aloud. PLAY. Lop. Ki. Ovidur. Was this? Adrian trailed off. She nodded. This is where it started. The first re-edit. The first refusal to let a story end. when the house stopped being a place and started becoming a system. She reached toward the console. The buttons pulsed once, as if recognizing her. The screen on the console flickered to life, static at first, then a single frame. It was her, but not her. Younger, less afraid, speaking to someone who didn't respond. Garrett, from the first moment. The hallway, the conversation. But something was wrong. The dialogue had changed. She pressed rewind, watched it again. Her voice no longer asked questions. It told. Her body language no longer conveyed confusion. It invited. The house had re-edited her memory, over and over. Every playthrough, every rewind, every loop, adjusted slightly until even she couldn't remember what she'd actually said. How many times has it run this scene? Adrian whispered. Enough to make it true, Lena said softly. Even if it never was. She hovered over the final button, OVW righty. The screen blinked. The console spoke. You may replace a false ending with silence. But silence is not escape. Lena looked at Adrian. He nodded. She pressed it. The console shut down instantly. The ground beneath them shook, this time violently. Reels snapped. Tape whipped through the air like angry serpents. The editor in the distance arched its back and let out a soundless howl, mouths opening wider than thought. The sky above fractured, not broke, fractured, into jagged panes of light, each one showing a different reality, a different version of the story of them. And one by one, they froze, not erased, not rewritten, paused, held. The house was trying to stop the collapse by holding time itself, but Lena had already spoken. The first edit had been undone, and without that, the loops fell like dominoes. The editor's form began to flicker. Its mouths closed in unison. Then they reversed, moving backward through every phrase it had ever spoken, every word unsaid in perfect reverse cadence. Until it was just a shape, then a blur, then nothing, silence again, but not empty, not loud, just natural, and somewhere behind them, the door back to the house, truly back, clicked open. No static, no threat, just open. Because this time, the story wasn't dragging them into itself. This time, they had written their way out. The door stood open behind them, but it didn't look like the others. It wasn't red, not mirrored, not veined with vines of speaker wire or etched in the names of the forgotten. This one was wooden, plain, quiet, and unnaturally still. But it didn't invite them. It waited. The kind of waiting that didn't require a decision. The kind of waiting that assumed you would come, eventually. Its hinges had no rust. Its frame cast no shadow. And from inside its darkness, no sound emerged, not even silence. Just a stillness so complete, it pulled at the skin of the world around it. Adrian stood at its edge and didn't move. He looked over his shoulder at the fragmented landscape they were leaving behind. Tape spools like torn roots, broken towers blinking their last messages, echoes of lost voices now drifting free from the loops that had trapped them. "Are you sure this is the way?" he asked. Lena didn't answer. She couldn't, because she wasn't sure. Nothing in this place worked by logic anymore. The story had fractured. And even though they had undone the first edit, what came next was no longer guaranteed. There was no script left to follow. No narrator whispering hints behind the wall. No thrum in the floor guiding their steps. Just instinct. And exhaustion. So she stepped through the door. Adrian followed. And the moment they crossed the threshold, the world didn't shift. It flipped. Like a reel spinning in reverse. Not just in direction, but in intention. The darkness beyond the door folded inward, dragging their bodies with it. Not violently, but deliberately, like breath being pulled back into a mouth that had stopped speaking long ago. Lena didn't fall. She didn't fly. She simply wasn't, and then, all at once, she was again. They landed in the house. But it wasn't the house. Not the one they remembered. Not the one they escaped. This house was before the edits, before the loops, before the rituals, the bleeding mirrors, the pulsing symbols. The floorboards were clean. The walls were bare. No names. No doors that led to other nightmares. just hallways, wooden steps, stillness. But it wasn't safe, because the stillness didn't mean the house was asleep. It meant it was waiting to wake up. Lena looked at Adrian. "We're in the zero draft." He nodded, before the story knew how to write itself. A new fear settled over her, not the fear of being consumed or forgotten, but of influence, of presence. They had entered a version of the house that hadn't yet chosen its voice. Every movement they made, every word they spoke, could shape what it would become. They weren't just survivors now. They were origin points. The house stirred. A creak above them. A groan in the floor beneath their feet. It was subtle, curious, like a child turning its head at a noise it doesn't understand. The light was soft, golden even, and entirely artificial. Memory, light, the kind that didn't come from bulbs or fixtures, but from the idea of what light should feel like. Lena's breath hitched. "We're inside its first breath." Adrian placed a hand on the nearest wall. It didn't pulse, it didn't hum, but it shivered. "This is where it started," he said, "where it made its first choice. The first time it took a voice and decided to keep it." They moved slowly, not speaking, careful not to disturb too much. Every step felt like it echoed backward through time. They passed rooms that were empty, not ominous, just waiting to be assigned meaning. A dining room with chairs never used. A study with no books but a single, blank cassette resting in the middle of the desk. A hallway with no end, just a wall that hadn't yet decided if it was a door. Then they found the stairs. Not the twisted, hungry staircase they'd climbed before. These stairs were perfect, unworn, unsullied, untouched. But halfway up, Lena stopped, because on the wall, written faintly in pencil, was a single word again. It was the first word the house ever remembered. The seed of the loop, the start of the repetition. Lena turned to Adrian. "If we leave it, this is where it all begins again," he nodded. One word becomes a sentence. The sentence becomes a scream. The scream becomes a ritual. The ritual becomes the house. She stared at the word, just 5 letters, but filled with gravity. If they left now, they might escape. But if they erased this, truly erased it, perhaps no one else would ever be swallowed. No names would be etched into wood. No tape would bleed. No stories would repeat. But the risk, if they erased too much, the house might collapse with them still inside. Or worse, rebuild itself in silence. And silence, Lena had learned, was never empty. She looked at Adrian. "We can't just run." "No," he agreed. "We have to end the sentence." So together, they climbed the stairs to finish a story that hadn't yet begun. A story written backwards. A house that was still a breath away from becoming haunted. And behind them, in the empty hallway, the pencil writing on the wall trembled. Then began to fade. The pencil word, again, faded slowly, like a thought slipping from memory. Not erased, not scratched out. It simply withdrew, inch by inch, line by line, until it was no longer visible. But Lena felt it still, the way a bruise still throbs after the skin has gone pale. She didn't need to see the word to know it still lived in the bones of the wall, in the grain of the wood. It was a memory that the house hadn't decided to forget, only hide. Temporarily. At the top of the stairs, the light changed. Not brighter, not darker, just different, like entering a dream that wasn't yours. The hallway stretched forward in eerie symmetry, each door evenly spaced, each one identical. There were 13 of them. Lena counted them twice, even walked the length of the hallway to be sure, but the number never changed. 13 doors, each unmarked, each waiting. Adrian stared at them, then at her. This is where the house first made a choice. What choice? Lena asked. He paused, eyes narrowing. To keep a voice. To make a memory permanent. A preserved word. A recorded breath. A story that could be played again. That was where it started. Not with death. Not with madness. Not even with violence. It began with a single voice the house refused to forget. One of these doors led to it. The original. The first listener. And if they were right, This listener didn't just fall into the house by accident. They created it. Lena stepped to the first door, put her ear to it. Nothing. The second. Just air. The third hummed softly, a low vibration that resonated through the handle. It reminded her of Garrett's office, of the tape recorder still warm after Lena left. The fourth door pulsed once beneath her hand, but then fell quiet. It wasn't until the seventh door that she felt it. The weight. She didn't hear anything. Didn't see anything. She just knew. This was the one. Ready? She asked. Adrian didn't answer. He just stepped beside her, his shoulders square, his breath steady. She turned the knob. The door opened slowly, and they stepped into a room so still, it felt wrong to breathe inside it. No furniture, no fixtures, no windows, just a floor, walls, ceiling, and in the center, a chair, and on the chair, a person, or what used to be one. They weren't bound, weren't strapped down or chained or locked. They simply sat there, back straight, hands resting calmly on their knees. Their eyes were closed, their skin pale, and around their head, like a crown of decay, was a tangled nest of wires leading to a series of recorders and speakers set into the walls. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all dark, all silent. Adrian whispered, "Is he dead?" Lena stepped closer. No, listening. She could see it now. His chest barely rising, breath soft but steady. His face twitched occasionally, like he was caught in a dream too thin to fully grasp. This was no prisoner. This was no victim. This was the origin. The first listener. Lena turned slowly in a circle, taking it all in. The recorders were of every era, reel-to-reel machines from the 40s. Cassette decks, 8-track players, MP3 modules, digital logs, layer after layer of listening devices from across time. Not gathered randomly. Collected. Every era, every format. All surrounding one man who had never stopped listening. Do we wake him? Adrian asked. Lena didn't answer. Because the question wasn't simple. If they woke him, he might speak. And if he spoke, the house might start again. But if they left him in silence, the loop could remain broken forever. Or worse, the house might remember why it started. That's when his eyes opened. No warning, no sound. Just open. Milky, not blind. Sharp, but not fully here. He looked at Lena first, then at Adrian, and then he smiled. "You made it back," he said. His voice was quiet, not aged, not young, timeless. "I wasn't sure you would." Lena stepped back. "Do you know us?" "I know every version of you," he replied. "I've listened to you die 100 ways. I've watched you loop through grief and rage and silence and defiance. But this one, this version, it's new." Adrian's jaw tightened. "What are you?" The man tilted his head. "I'm the moment before a story begins. I'm the reason the house learned to remember. Someone had to listen first." Lena's voice trembled. "But why? Why trap all of us? Why repeat everything?" "Because silence is lonely," he whispered, and the world stopped listening. He lifted his hands slowly, not to threaten, to offer. One story, played loud enough, can become a place. And if that place remembers enough voices, it becomes something real. "You made the house," Lena said. "I spoke," he replied. And the house replied. Adrian stepped forward. "We ended the story, undid the first edit." The man nodded. "I know. That's why you're here." "So what now?" The first listener stood, and every machine in the room turned on. No sound, just the hum. The first hum. The hum the house was built from. But this time, it wasn't calling them in. It wasn't trying to trap. It wasn't even asking for obedience. It was waiting, and Lena finally understood. This room was the choice. This man had spoken the first sentence. Now it was their turn. "Say nothing," Adrian whispered. But Lena shook her head. "No," she said softly. "We don't need to be silent. We just need to say the right thing." She stepped toward the center of the room, looked the first listener in the eye, and said, "This time, we tell it together." The machines pulsed. And for the first time in its endless existence, the house didn't listen, it heard. The machines didn't scream, they didn't whine. They didn't spiral into chaos or birth some great monstrous feedback loop the way Lena feared they might. Instead, they listened. Not as recorders, not as traps, but as witnesses. For the first time, the house didn't just soak in voices like sponges desperate to be full. It paused. It waited. The breath it had always taken. The breath that had pulled everyone in, that had fed it for generations. Hung in the air, suspended. The house was holding it, choosing not to exhale, because Lena had spoken a sentence it didn't expect. This time, we tell it together. The first listener, who had never truly been a man, not in the way Adrian or Lena were, tilted his head slowly. His expression didn't change. He didn't smile, didn't frown. Just listened. Lena could feel it in the walls, in the floor, in the thrum beneath her skin. The house wasn't preparing to devour her. It wasn't rewriting her. It was waiting for the next line. Adrian stepped forward, slowly. The air didn't resist him. No coils of tape wrapped his ankles. No reels stirred. The house was still, listening. Letting them exist inside it without rewriting them, he took Lena's hand. The gesture was so human, so grounded in something unwritten, that the very air rippled with confusion. The walls flinched. The old reels gave a low shudder, not in fear, in recognition, as if they remembered something they'd never known before. Lena felt it too, a tightening in her chest, not from fear or pain, but from clarity. This place, the house, the loops, the echoing halls of sound, it had never known what to do with collaboration. It thrived on isolation, on fractured voices, separated by pain and madness and noise. Even when people entered it together, the house made sure they ended alone. It made sure each story was a solo act. Until now. The moment Adrian's fingers laced through hers, Lena felt it. Not a surge of power, not some mythic revelation, but a shift in the house's structure. The very logic of it groaned. Something foundational bent under the weight of this quiet resistance. The idea that a story could have more than one voice, and that both could survive. The first listener blinked for the first time in, maybe ever. "You're changing the echo," he said, and his voice didn't sound proud or afraid. It sounded curious. "Not changing," Lena said quietly. "We're correcting it." He glanced down at the cables still threaded into his skull, like veins of copper and memory. "Then you know what has to happen next." Lena nodded. They couldn't leave him here. Not because he was dangerous, not because he'd trapped them, but because he was the loop. The house began with his story, and his story had never ended. It had just repeated. Again, and again, and again. As long as he sat in that chair, speaking without knowing, listening without questioning, the house would keep searching for listeners to echo him. Adrian looked at the wall of recorders. "All of this, it's you." The listener nodded. "And every version of me, every restart, every rejection, every scream that never reached its final word, they all live here, together." "But not one of them ever asked to stop," Lena asked. "No one ever spoke over me," he said, tilting his head toward them. "Not until now." The house vibrated, not violently, like a person taking a slow, rattling breath after holding it for far too long. The tension of it broke something. Not the house, the habit of the house, the ritual, the groove it had followed for lifetimes. Lena looked down at the cables. She stepped closer. And the house didn't resist. It didn't hiss. It didn't scream. It didn't try to rewrite her steps. The wires felt warm in her hands. Not alive. Not dead, just tired. She pulled gently, and the first cable slid out of the listener's skull. No blood, just a sigh. He slumped forward, but not lifeless. Relieved, Adrian stepped in and helped with the others. One by one, they removed the voice from the loop, and with every wire pulled, the machines dimmed. The recorders clicked off. The reels stopped spinning. The sound in the walls slowed from a throb to a whisper, to a heartbeat, to silence. And then the listener stood on his own. He looked at them with wide, clear eyes. "I'm not the story anymore," he said. "No," Lena said. "You're a person again." The house shivered. not in fear, in release. The structure around them didn't collapse. It changed. The floor beneath their feet folded like paper, not violently, but carefully. As if the house was rearranging itself, not out of panic, but choice. Light spilled in from the cracks above them. Natural light, real sunlight, warming the dust in the air. Walls peeled back, rooms expanded. And the hallway outside the door, the one with 13 doors, began to shift. The doors vanished. All but one, the exit. But this time, it was not red, not jagged, not pulsing. It was open. A front door. Plain wood. Morning sun just beyond it. The listener followed them, silent but at peace. Lena and Adrian walked forward together. And the house, for once, did not whisper as they left. It did not warn. It did not record. It only listened. And finally it understood. They crossed the threshold not with urgency, but with reverence. The open door behind them. The one that should have closed, should have slammed shut, and sealed them back inside the belly of the beast, stayed ajar. The sunlight beyond was real this time. Not imagined, not tainted with the house's sickly filters or the static light of failed memory. It was the kind of light that warmed the skin and stung the eyes. Morning light. Freedom light. Lena blinked against it, part of her still expecting the trick, the snap of reality as it collapsed around her again. But it didn't. The house let them go. Adrian stepped out first. The air hit his lungs like breath after drowning, sharp, real, alive. He turned to Lena, who followed close behind, and then both turned back to the doorway. The listener stood just inside the frame, unmoving. He hadn't crossed. His body, now free from wires and looping commands, looked small beneath the open sky. For a moment, he was just a man. No longer a relic, no longer the root of something terrible, just human. "Come with us," Adrian said, voice low. The listener smiled faintly. "I wouldn't know what to do out there." "You could learn," Lena offered. He shook his head gently. "That world isn't mine. It hasn't been for a long time." A gust of wind passed between them, tugging at Lena's sleeves, pushing the door gently. But it didn't shut. It stayed still. The house wasn't hurrying them. It was simply watching. Not hungry anymore, not haunted. Just there. And Lena realized. This place would never vanish. The house wasn't a thing to be destroyed. It had always been built from what people left behind. A single voice became many, and many voices made a structure. And, while they had severed the loop, pulled the thread that bound it to madness, the house itself remained. But now it was silent, and in that silence there was no invitation. No promise. No lure. The door was just a door. The listener nodded at them once, then stepped back, not retreating, returning, back into the place he had built, not to rule it, not to haunt it, to witness it, now, finally, for what it truly was. The door began to close, not by force, not by magic, but like a chapter ending with a soft, deliberate page turn. Lena didn't resist. Adrian didn't move. They both watched the door close on the man and the house he birthed, until the frame vanished in the sunlight, replaced by trees and earth and wind. They were outside. Not in a pocket dimension. Not in a memory loop. Just outside. And for the first time in what felt like centuries, the world didn't tilt beneath their feet. It held. Lena looked at her hands, half expecting them to glitch, to pulse with static, to carry the scent of the house like a stain. But they were clean, solid. Hers. Adrian knelt and touched the soil, letting it run through his fingers. "It's really over." Lena didn't answer, because she knew better. It wasn't over, but it was changed. They walked in silence, leaving the clearing behind, letting the wind carry the last echoes of the house's memory away. Birds called from the trees. The sun warmed the backs of their necks. The path ahead was real, uneven, dappled with light, and every step they took stayed taken. No more loops, no more resets. Hours passed before they found the road, a cracked, forgotten stretch of asphalt that cut through the trees like a scar. Lena recognized none of it, and that comforted her. They were far from where they began. far from Garrett's recordings, from the red door, from the shrine of static. And yet, as they walked the road, Lena could feel it, that flicker. Like something buried deep inside her was still tuned to the frequency of the house. Not controlled by it, not broken by it, just aware of it. A part of her would always remember. A part of her had to. Because forgetting was what started all of this. Forgetting that voices matter. That silence can starve a person, just as easily as noise can swallow them. That listening should be a gift, not a weapon. They walked until the sun began to dip low in the sky, painting the trees in gold and blood. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. What they had survived couldn't be compressed into words. Not yet, maybe not ever. Not without risking turning it into a story again. A myth. A warning. A lie. But as they walked, Lena realized something else. They weren't alone. She turned once, just briefly, and far behind them, in the deepest part of the trees, she saw it, the house. Not looming. Not alive. Just there. Stillant. Sleeping, like a book left open on a table. Waiting for someone, anyone, to start reading again. Lena turned away and kept walking. She wouldn't be the next reader. Not now. Not ever. They reached the edge of the woods, just as twilight laid its hand across the treetops, the sky bruising into a purple so deep it felt like falling. The road curved gently into the mouth of a small town, one Lena didn't recognize. Though there was something achingly familiar about the way it slouched against the horizon. The gas station at the corner. The buzz of a flickering street lamp, a rusted bike half buried in grass. It all felt like a place they should have remembered but couldn't. Or maybe it wasn't memory at all. Maybe the house had simply taken so much that even the real world now looked like a set. Adrian walked beside her in silence. His shoulders hunched slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of survival. They hadn't said a word since leaving the clearing. There was nothing to process yet, no way to make the trauma linear. It came in waves, in flashes. A flicker of Garrett's voice, the scream of the red door, the clack of tape reels spinning too fast. They carried it all like glass in their lungs. They found an old motel. One of those roadside kinds with half the neon letters missing, and a desk clerk who barely blinked when they walked in covered in dirt and silence. He handed them a key. Room 5. No questions. No comments. Just a nod like he'd seen worse. Lena stepped into the room first. It smelled like dust and stories that never got finished. Faded carpet. A television with 2 channels. A nightstand with a Gideon's Bible, and an empty cassette case sitting right on top. She stared at it for a long time before touching it. Empty. Blank label, but not new. The plastic was cracked in one corner, like it had been dropped or stepped on. Adrian stood behind her. "They're still out here," he said softly. "What?" "The tapes," he murmured. "The ones the house released. The ones that escaped before it looped. The house remembered how to store things before it remembered how to trap them." Lena nodded. "So there are copies. Scattered. Forgotten. But they still play." And with that came a terrifying realization. They hadn't stopped it. Not completely. They had broken the loop. Had silenced the house, rewound its first recording, freed the voice that started it all. But the echoes, the fragments, the pieces of it had already escaped. In pockets. In places where the story had already been told, or worse, recorded. Somewhere out there, someone could press play, hear a voice that didn't belong, fall into a rhythm they couldn't explain. Get curious, get lost, and the house would begin to build itself again. Not from architecture or walls, but from memory, from listening. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cassette. If it plays, it starts over. Adrian shrugged. Not the whole thing, not the original loop, but something new, a variation, a mutation. She gritted her teeth. "We should find them." He sat beside her. "And do what?" "Smash them, burn them." "Yes," she said, "burn every last one." But he didn't move, and she knew why. Because the tapes weren't the house. They were invites. You couldn't burn an invitation and expect the host to forget you existed. They needed something more than fire. They needed answers. I want to know where they came from, Lena whispered. How far it reached, who else it touched. If there were people before Garrett, if the listener had predecessors, if the house was ever truly quiet even once. Adrian nodded slowly, then we tracked them. All of them. They stayed the night, slept in shifts. Neither of them rested. The house was silent, yes, but it had infected the edges of the world. There was no safety yet, only delay. In the morning, they packed what little they had and walked into town. They needed maps. They needed names. They needed records. Libraries. Archives. They needed the ghost trails of a story told too many times in hushed voices and hidden rooms. They needed to find the places where silence had failed. The town was still. Too still. Lena noticed it quickly. No kids playing. No traffic. A dog lay sleeping in the street. Doors were open, but no one stood in them. It was early, yes, but not empty. Adrian's jaw tensed. Something's off. They entered the diner, and there by the register sat another cassette. No case, just a label with 2 words. Foar wo you. The tape buzzed gently. It hadn't started playing yet, but the deck it rested on was powered, waiting. Lena didn't touch it. Someone knows we're here. Adrian stepped back toward the door. They're watching. Lena turned in a slow circle. The windows reflected too much light. The mirrors behind the counter were too clean. It felt like a stage dressed for a show that hadn't started yet. And the hum returned. Soft, distant, familiar. Not the house, but its child. The tape, the loop, still alive, still echoing. She picked it up slowly, then snapped it in 2. The tape inside curled like a dying snake, writhing once, then still. The sound stopped. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a door slammed, a signal. They weren't alone. Someone was still spreading the story. And Lena finally understood they hadn't escaped the story. They'd become its editors. And the next chapter was already being written, without them. The door that slammed echoed longer than it should have. Not the way sound bounces in a hallway, but the way a memory repeats itself until it becomes prophecy. Lena froze, the broken cassette still in her hand. The magnetic tape dangling like something that had bled out. Adrian had already moved toward the diner's front window, eyes scanning the street outside, shoulders tight with instinct. There was no one there, no footsteps, no whisper of retreat. But they both knew what they'd just heard. This town had been touched. Maybe not looped, maybe not entirely consumed, but something here had heard the house's voice, and something had answered back. Lena dropped the split cassette on the counter. It landed with a sound too loud for its size, like it didn't want to be forgotten. Adrian turned from the window. There's someone still listening, he said. And now they know we're here. Lena didn't ask how. She didn't need to. The story had grown roots. Each tape was a seed, each player a mouth. The house hadn't needed to keep growing. The people did it for it now, copying, listening, sharing, spreading. Not as a curse, not even as a ritual, but as obsession, as belief. How do we fight something that isn't alive? She asked, walking toward him. Adrian shrugged, lips pressed into a tight line. Maybe we don't fight it. Maybe we follow it. You want to chase it? She asked, more sharply than she meant. No, he said. I want to understand it. Because if we don't, someone else will. Someone more willing to believe in its voice than question it. That was the real danger now. The house no longer needed a foundation. It didn't need walls or wires or hidden hallways. It just needed storytellers. And in a world obsessed with content, everyone was a potential listener, a recorder, a speaker. They stepped out of the diner. The street was still empty, but it didn't feel abandoned. It felt staged, or maybe paused, like someone had pressed record and then walked away, waiting for them to speak first. At the edge of town, they found the first sign, a flyer stapled to a wooden pole fluttering in the wind. At first glance, it looked ordinary. an ad for an art exhibit. But Lena stepped closer and froze. The background image wasn't a painting or a sculpture. It was a grainy still frame of the hallway. That hallway, where she had first seen Garrett. The carpet pattern, the dim lighting, the angle. Someone had captured it, preserved it, displayed it. At the bottom of the flyer, handwritten in ink, "Silence can be shaped." Lena ripped it down. Adrian grabbed her wrist. "There'll be more." She nodded. "Then let's find them." They moved fast. Every corner, every shop window, every billboard became a puzzle. Half-finished phrases, images that only made sense when viewed at a certain angle. A broken mirror in the barber shop with a cassette glued to the back. A bookstore display of horror novels, each one marked with a small red sticker in the shape of a spiral. A laundromat television looping static between episodes of old sitcoms, and every 6 seconds, the screen flashed a single word, less 10. Someone was planting these, deliberately, carefully, ritualistically, and not just in this town. Lena felt it in her bones. This wasn't a local infection. The story had gone global. Not loudly, not in waves, but like mold. Slow, silent, invisible until it was everywhere. The tapes weren't the only vessels anymore. Screens, posters, audio, music, podcasts. Anything that could carry a signal. Anything that could wrap silence around meaning. They found a map. An old one, posted on the wall of a gas station. Someone had circled 10 cities. No explanation. Just red ink, sloppy handwriting. At the bottom, signal strength increasing. Adrian traced his finger along the road. "These are drops," he said. "They're planting tapes, or worse, versions, at key points. Every city is a test, a broadcast." Lena didn't want to believe it, but she already did, and worse, she understood it. The story had become a contagion, not of death, not of madness, but of retelling. People were drawn to it. They wanted to hear it. The way people gather around a fire and beg for ghost stories that they swear don't scare them. The way some stories feel more real than memory. The house didn't need to trap people anymore. It only needed to be heard. And the moment someone listened, they became part of the architecture. The house was no longer a place. It was a movement. "We're too late," Lena said. Adrian didn't respond. He just folded the map, put it in his jacket pocket, and looked down the road. "Then we catch up." That night, they didn't sleep. They drove a stolen car. The road stretched ahead like a long wire humming with unsaid words. Every radio station scanned for familiar static. Every town they passed was a potential echo. Lena kept a journal now. Names, dates, markings. Locations of tapes or graffiti or broadcast signals that repeated the house's code. Because this wasn't about destroying it anymore. It was about understanding its new language. A new war was coming. Not fought with weapons or fear, but with stories, with the act of telling itself. And in that war, silence would no longer protect anyone, because someone, somewhere, would always press play. The first one they found was in the desert, a cracked little town gasping on the edge of nowhere, with sand crusted into its windows and dead insects piling in the corners of broken porches. No name on the welcome sign, just peeling paint, sun-bleached bones of what used to be a community. Lena and Adrian followed the map's first red circle here, expecting emptiness. But emptiness would have been a mercy. The signal hit them the moment they passed the rusted gas station. Low, persistent, like a heartbeat trying to match their own. Not from a tower. Not even from a speaker. It pulsed through the ground, a deep thrum crawling through their feet, into their spines, and whispering its way into their thoughts. Lena gripped the dashboard of the car. Adrian's knuckles whitened on the wheel. They didn't need to speak. They knew this rhythm. It wasn't music. It wasn't code. It was recognition. The house was awake here. Not fully, no structure, no red doors, but awake, listening. And it had chosen a voice. The radio tower at the edge of town looked long dead. Antennas snapped like broken fingers, panels warped and rusted. But the station below, half buried in sand, still hummed with power. Not municipal power, something older, wilder. The kind of energy born from belief. Lena led the way down the steps. The walls of the stairwell were lined with old stickers, band names, tour dates, college slogans. But between them, etched in marker, were the same three words repeated over and over again. I heard it. At the bottom, the door wasn't locked. Inside, the station was dim and pulsing red, as if caught in perpetual warning. Tape decks lined the walls, but they weren't playing music. They spun in reverse, constant, meaningless. And in the booth, behind the glass, a woman sat with her back to them, headphones clamped tight over her ears, mouth moving slowly as if narrating a dream. Adrian moved toward her, but Lena stopped him. The air in the room listened back. That's what terrified her most. Not the equipment, not the tapes, not even the familiar hum in the walls. It was the awareness. The station was self-aware, not like the house had been, in its monstrous, predatory way, but like a wound that had grown a mouth. She stepped closer to the glass. The woman behind it was maybe 40, pale, thin, eyes glassy and half-focused, like she was looking at something across time. Her lips moved with soft rhythm. It begins again, it begins again, it begins again. She wasn't broadcasting. Not anymore. She was echoing. A loop, but not the house's loop, her own. Lena found the mic switch and flipped it off. The woman froze, then blinked. Then, without looking, turned the volume dial on her headphones to 0 and spoke into the air. They never turned me off. Adrian stepped into the booth. Who? Her voice cracked. The voices. From the tapes. I found one years ago. Played it for fun, for irony. Just one old cassette in a thrift shop, labeled with nothing. Static. Silence. But then it talked. Not all at once. Just at night. Just when I was tired. It started small, a few words. A name. A memory that wasn't mine. Lena felt cold, and then? She asked. I listened. The woman whispered. And they made me a station. She pulled off the headphones, slowly, like they weighed as much as regret. When people drive through here, they tune in. I don't ask them to. I don't even want them to. But they do. And when they listen, it grows stronger. Louder. The words get clearer. Like it's building itself again. Adrian leaned close. What does it want? She smiled, tears wetting her eyes. To be remembered, not feared, not worshipped, remembered. Because even evil can be lonely. Lena looked around the room. The recorders, the speakers, the wall lined with burnt-out cartridges and reels that spun nothing but dust. She reached for the main switch. The woman didn't stop her. You can't stop it, she said. But maybe you can slow it down. Lena pulled the lever. The station fell silent. The hum didn't vanish, but it recoiled like a breath being held. For now, the voice had been muted, but it was still present. Outside, the sky had darkened. The town was empty still. But now, Lena realized, it wasn't just abandoned. It had been emptied, used, hollowed out to give the station life. And how many others had gone this way? Cities turned to transmitters, homes into loops, people into stories. Adrian stood beside her as the tower creaked in the wind. It's not just the house anymore, he said. No, Lena agreed. It's the world. Because now that the house had been heard, it didn't need walls. It had frequencies. It had listeners. And worst of all, it had believers. They left the town before dawn, the old station fading into a speck behind them as the road unwound across the desert like an exposed nerve. But even as they drove, the silence in the car wasn't complete. It vibrated just beneath the surface, like a memory you haven't admitted to yet. Every mile they passed felt heavier, as if they were being pulled not forward but deeper. Deeper into a world that had already changed without anyone realizing. By the time the sun cracked the horizon, Adrian was gripping the wheel so tightly his fingers had gone pale. They're not just spreading it, he said quietly. They're building it. Lena didn't ask who. She already knew. The ones leaving tapes, hanging flyers, curating whispers. They weren't just worshippers or victims. They were engineers. People who had heard the story and decided it needed more. That it wasn't just something to fear, it was something to complete. And somewhere out there, someone, or many someones, were helping it take shape again. Not as a haunted house tucked in the woods, but as something bigger, smarter, and harder to destroy. Their architects, Lena murmured, of the replay. She reached into her bag and pulled out the map again. Red circles marked with quick slashes, ink lines stretching like veins. They'd checked 5 so far. And everyone told a different version of the same story. A house that wasn't a house. Voices that weren't dead, just lost. Recordings that didn't wait to be played, but sought out listeners. And then there were the gaps. The spaces on the map with no markings. Not because nothing was happening there, but because someone didn't want them to know yet. She stared at one particular blank spot in the center of the map, a large city buzzing with tech and media. No markings, no notes. "That's where we go next," she said. Adrian frowned. "It's not marked. Exactly. It's being protected." It made sense. If you were building something this complex, this dangerous, you'd want to shield the core. Let the world get distracted with small towns and static. Let the noise build up in the outskirts. All while the true broadcast prepared itself in silence. They arrived by evening. A city alive with motion, lights, and endless voices, nothing haunted about it. No strange flyers, no broken mirrors, no loops of static, just motion, normalcy, order. But Lena felt it immediately, the absence. It was too clean. No ambient noise spilled from alleyways. No late night radios hummed from open windows. It was as if the city's soundtrack had been curated. A silence buried under manufactured sound. Noise without content. That night, they walked through downtown. They passed a record shop still open after midnight. Inside, rows of vinyls gleamed beneath soft orange light. Lena stepped in. The clerk didn't even look up. A stack of cassettes sat near the counter, unmarked, just plastic and tape. She picked one up and turned it over. No label, no artist. She asked, "What's this?" The clerk didn't blink. "Local experimental project." Adrian reached for another. "What kind?" The man's voice was flat. "You'd have to listen." But Lena already knew. She could feel it in her fingertips. The subtle hum, the familiar itch of recognition. The tapes were blank in name only. They carried something. She left without buying one. Outside, Adrian whispered, "They're embedding it in everything. Music, podcasts, advertisements, even silence." It wasn't about scaring people anymore. It was about normalizing the hum. Letting the voice of the house bleed into everyday life. Until it was no longer questioned. Until it didn't seem strange to hear something speaking when no one was there. Until repetition became comfort. They found the first studio the next day. A sleek, glass-walled building on the 33rd floor of a tower downtown. No markings, no logo. Just a black door with a keypad and a camera that watched them far too long. They didn't try to enter. Instead, they waited, observed. People came and went, but none looked like employees. Just listeners, wearing headphones, carrying USBs, blank-eyed and too calm. Architects. They weren't ghosts or fanatics. They were builders. People who believed the story of the house could evolve. That it should evolve. Into an idea, a presence, a system. One night, Lena followed one of them, a woman in her late 20s. Normal, clean shoes, coffee stain on her sleeve. The kind of person who vanished into a crowd. But Lena tracked her into a bookstore where no one browsed. The woman walked to the back, pulled a book from the shelf, and tucked a tiny cassette inside its hollowed center. She left it there. No ceremony, just left it. Lena waited until she was gone, then took the tape. This one was labeled Echo Zero. They played it in the car with the volume low. No screaming, no ghosts, just a story. A man talking about a house he'd visited as a child, a house with too many doors, a house where the floors sang at night, a house that watched him sleep. His voice was calm, warm, compelling. By the end of the tape, Lena was gripping her own wrist just to remind herself she was real. because the voice made her forget. Forget where she was. Forget when she was. Adrian stopped the tape. They sat in silence. Then he whispered, "It's not just broadcasting anymore." Lena looked at him. "It's teaching." Each version of the story was an onboarding, a subtle indoctrination. No horror, no violence, just truth told through pattern, repetition, echo. Echo Zero was the first. There were likely hundreds. And the house, it didn't need to exist anymore. Because everyone was being taught how to build it again. In basements, studios, streams. A new architecture born from repetition, not haunted. Just remembered. That was worse. Because memories don't die. They replicate. And if you teach enough people how to remember the house, eventually, the house remembers you back. It began subtly. A flicker of something at the edge of Lena's thoughts. A rhythm she hadn't noticed before in the way her footsteps echoed, the way Adrian breathed beside her, the way silence held just a second too long after a door closed. The house, if you could still call it that, was no longer a location. It was inside them, in patterns, in timing, in the unconscious way her fingers began tracing spirals on her leg when she was thinking too hard. Not because she was afraid, because she remembered. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. They drove through 3 more cities in a week. The red marks on their map had turned into scars. They traced each one with increasing dread, uncovering transmission points hidden in plain sight. Not in churches or crypts or run-down homes, but in media labs, editing bays, music collectives, youth theaters. Places where stories were shaped, where sound became identity. Each one played a version of the house, but not the house they remembered. No, these were polished, streamlined, packaged for attention. The jagged horror of the original had been smoothed into eerie documentaries, viral mystery ARGs, immersive podcasts with addictive cliffhangers. Lena had found one uploaded only 3 days ago, already sitting at 5 million views. The narrator's voice, perfect, calm, friendly. The voice of someone who knew you would listen. And nestled within every episode were the codes, the loops, the motifs, not overt, but there. A certain phrase repeated, a hum beneath the outro music. A name whispered so faintly you only noticed it the 3rd time you listened. The house was being translated into every language, every platform. And every time someone played it, they didn't just hear the story. They became part of it. That's when Lena started forgetting things. Not big things. Not birthdays or names. Moments. Like where she'd parked the car. Whether she'd eaten that day. The exact shape of Garrett's face, which used to live vividly in her memory. The house was taking back its truth. Reclaiming the narrative. Making her one of the many whose voices would eventually be lost in its ever-growing archive. She tried to fight it. Wrote notes. Spoke aloud when she woke up. Recorded voice memos of everything that happened. But even those began to change. One morning, she played back a memo from the night before, her voice, flat, cold, repeating a phrase 12 times before the audio cut to silence. We're all just bricks in a story that never stops. She hadn't said that. Not knowingly. Adrian was changing too. Not visibly. But the sharpness in his eyes was dulling. The edges of his thoughts softened like pages left in the rain. He started asking the same questions twice. Where they were going. What they'd just seen. Whether they were being followed. The terrifying thing was that they weren't being followed. They were being remembered. There's a difference. A follower wants something from you. A memory. It just wants to keep you. They made it to the final mark on their map. A coastal city, pulsing with nightlife and dreams. Lena had hoped it would be different. That they'd find a single room, a final cassette, maybe even someone like the listener. Someone who could help them unplug it all. But the moment they stepped into the city, they knew. They were too late. It was already built here. Not underground. Not hidden. But celebrated. They passed a club with a line around the block. On the marquee THEOCMERSV Audio E Experience. Lena's stomach turned. She looked at the crowd, young, laughing, holding glowing headphones. Inside, a perfectly produced audio journey played nightly based on a real myth, not a warning, a brand. A merch booth sold shirts that said I escaped ride d'or. Another read Rabwine demi, and Lena realized, horrified, that the house had done it. It had become entertainment, not feared, loved. Adrian walked stiffly through the crowd. This isn't a story anymore, he said. It's a culture. They tried to get into the studio behind the experience. Posed as journalists, researchers. No one stopped them, no one cared. Because when you willingly surrender to the loop, it doesn't need to trap you. It just waits for you to hit repeat. Inside, rows of editors sat with headphones on, nodding, smiling. Some were asleep. One was whispering into a mic, "Say it again. Say it again. Say it again." Another was staring at static and smiling. A poster on the wall showed a blueprint, not of a house, of a network. Nodes connected by spirals. Lines representing shared phrases, shared audio, overlapping listeners. The house was now a neural map, and every listener was a neuron. Lena stared at it for a long time, because there, at the center of the spiral, was her name. Lena Monroe, origin point C. She stepped back. Adrian caught her before she fell. "I didn't upload anything," she whispered. "You didn't have to," he said. They had recorded her. Everything she'd done. Every tape she touched. Every word she screamed into a microphone. Every memory she whispered into a wall. It had all been kept. Stored. Cataloged, and now she was part of the next generation. The house didn't need to possess her. It had turned her into content. And as they left the building, empty, handed, shaken, she heard it again. A child on the street singing quietly. "I dream of doors red and wide, they open up and let me inside-y." The child looked up at her and smiled. Lena turned and walked fast. The memory wasn't just remembering her. It had already retold her. And in a world hungry for new stories, the house had become the perfect meal. Because everyone wants to hear a good ghost story. Especially when they don't know. They're the ghost. It wasn't until the child's song faded behind them that Lena finally spoke again. Her voice didn't shake, not like before. It had something worse in it now, resignation. The kind of quiet that settles in when you stop hoping you'll wake up from the nightmare and start looking for where it ends. "It's not spreading," she said. "It's settled." Adrian didn't argue. He just nodded, eyes fixed on the sidewalk like it might crack open beneath them and reveal the house's old wooden floors. And maybe it would. Because the more they looked around, the more they realized the house wasn't lurking anymore. It was smiling. Right in plain sight. They passed a bus stop ad for a new streaming series called The Listener's Testament, with the tagline, "There's a voice in all of us." Lena stared at it for a long time, heart thudding. The face on the poster was stylized, blurred like an old VHS still, but the jawline, the slumped posture, it was unmistakable. Garrett, not an actor, not a reimagining. A real photo, distorted, stolen, and monetized. Someone had used the footage. Someone had recorded them in the house, and now the story was being sold back to the world in high definition. "I think we're in the sequel," Adrian muttered. But Lena knew better. This wasn't a sequel. There were no chapters, no endings. Only reboots. Only the same story, told again and again, until it stopped sounding like horror and started sounding like nostalgia. Like something safe. Something remembered fondly. They ducked into a bar, hoping for quiet. But even there, the music playing had a strange loop in the background. Barely audible unless you were listening for it. Lena was. It wasn't lyrics. It was breathing. Familiar. Rhythmic. Almost like someone else was already sitting inside her head. Adrian ordered 2 drinks they wouldn't touch. Lena picked at a coaster, scraping the edge with her nail. The logo was a spiral. Not the house's spiral. Not exactly. But close enough to pull her stomach into knots. "It's not just the story that's been recorded," she said. "It's us. We're artifacts now. We're what people click. He didn't respond, but she saw it in his eyes. He'd already known. Maybe before she did. Maybe he'd felt it the moment they left the original house. Maybe that was the real trick. They hadn't escaped the loop. They'd become the next layer of it. And every city, every cassette, every whisper, it wasn't just spreading the house. It was building a fan base. They stayed in a motel that night, the kind where the walls were too thin and the static on the TV never fully cleared. Lena tried to sleep but couldn't. Not just from the noise, but from the mirror on the wall. It was too clean, too intentional. She stood and faced it, expecting her reflection. Instead, she saw herself. Yes, but standing beside her was a blur, a smudged silhouette that pulsed with faint static, watching her, not menacing, just recording. As if even now, in this room, in this moment, someone somewhere was playing her back. She turned on the TV, anything to break the spell. But even that was worse. A rerun of a talk show featuring a guest describing their latest creative project. It's inspired by a house that listens, they said. But it's not horror, it's existential. It's about memory. The audience laughed at something Lena didn't catch, applauded at nothing. And the guest smiled, holding up a book with a cover that looked exactly like the hallway Garrett disappeared into. She turned it off. Outside, the street buzzed with life. Couples laughed. Headphones bobbed on ears. Neon signs blinked over closed bookstores and late-night coffee shops. But every face, every window, every passing car felt aware, not paranoid, not dangerous, just knowing. Like the city had memorized her outline and was now painting it onto everything. Adrian sat on the edge of his bed, hunched over, headphones off but still curled around his neck. I heard something last night, he said. In the hotel before this one, while I was half asleep. Lena waited. It said, "Don't worry. We'll make you timeless." He looked up at her. "I think it already has." She sat beside him. The silence between them dense with fear neither wanted to voice. They weren't fighting a house anymore. They were fighting legacy. A story so perfectly shaped that it didn't matter what it destroyed, as long as it was retold. And somewhere, maybe in dozens of rooms just like this one, people were already listening, not to some cursed tape, but to them. Cut up clips, warped voices. Their names passed like folklore, their faces half reconstructed by podcasts, creepypasta forums, fan-made documentaries. And the more those versions spread, the more real they became. More real than Lena's memory. More real than what actually happened. They had lost control of the narrative. And the narrative didn't need truth. It needed rhythm, repetition, recognition. Lena stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, a billboard changed in real time. She watched the flickering pixels form a phrase. It lasted less than 2 seconds, then changed again. "Do ye remember you?" She didn't scream. There was no one left to warn, only listeners, only storytellers, only fans, and the worst part, the house was finally happy. Because the scariest thing it had ever wanted, more than blood, more than worship, more than voices in the dark, was to be loved. And now, it was. Because horror has become the new nostalgia, and nostalgia never dies. The night before it ended, Lena dreamed of silence, not absence, not peace, not rest, but the kind of silence that watches, that waits, that remembers. She stood in a room without windows, without doors, without time. There was no light, and yet she could see. Her breath fogged nothing. Her feet made no sound on the invisible floor, but all around her, something listened. A presence so vast, it didn't need form, it hummed like memory. A weight that bent reality inward. And in that silence, she heard her own voice. Not present tense, not future, a playback, her screams, her whispers, her conversations with Adrian, her begging, her disbelief. All of it looped back in a rhythm she couldn't break, stitched together like a confession she didn't remember giving. She woke up gasping, but not surprised, because deep down, Lena knew she hadn't been speaking into the void. She'd been recorded since the beginning. The world outside had changed again. The hotel TV played a children's show. Cartoons dancing to a song that used phrases from the original tapes, now harmlessly wrapped in synth beats and neon filters. Kids hummed it on sidewalks. Adults wore vintage red door shirts without irony. An entire generation had grown up with the house as a backdrop, its horror smoothed into aesthetic, its presence reshaped as a vibe. It had gone mainstream. Adrian stood in the doorway, watching her. He hadn't slept. "Today's the last one," he said. She nodded. No need to ask what he meant. The final node, the source of the new expansion. Not the house, not a building, but a person. Someone they'd been chasing through breadcrumbs and broadcasts and whispers. The one now writing the story on purpose. The one who believed the house should be everywhere. Who saw it not as curse, but clarity. The architect. They found him in a cleanroom studio on the edge of a university campus, buried beneath layers of funding and plausible deniability. The man wasn't ancient. He wasn't robed. He wasn't insane. He looked like anyone. Hoodie, tired eyes, headphones slung around his neck. The kind of person who never stopped listening. He didn't act surprised when they entered. "I was waiting for you," he said, gesturing to the second chair in front of the mixing board. Lena didn't sit. "You're the one broadcasting now," she said. The architect smiled gently. "Not broadcasting, archiving, for the next cycle." Adrian stared at him. "Why?" "Because no story should die," the architect said. "Not when it resonates. Not when it reaches this many." He gestured to a massive server wall behind him, lights blinking in perfect sequence. Not erratic, not overloaded, harmonized, a rhythm. The house's hum translated into digital pulse. "This isn't a horror anymore," he said. "It's structure. It helps people understand their place. They listen. They feel part of something. It gives them context." "You're spreading possession," Lena snapped. "I'm giving people identity," he answered. Lena stepped forward. "You're erasing the truth. You're letting the lie rewrite everything we lived." The architect leaned back. "What truth?" "Yours. Garrett's. Every telling becomes a new version. Every loop a new lens. And you too. You're the most famous version of all." He gestured again. And suddenly she saw it. On one of the screens, a feed from a podcast. Inside the red door, the Lena Files. Over 4 million subscribers. Another screen showed a VR game where players explored a shifting house made of their own memories. Another, a documentary premiere poster with her silhouette and the tagline, "She heard first." And then, the last screen. A live stream. Thousands watching. Their current conversation playing back. Lena froze. They were already in the loop. Not being hunted, not being forgotten, being broadcast. "This isn't a story anymore," she whispered. "It's a religion." The architect didn't flinch. "It's a framework. People need something to shape the silence, something to echo when they're alone. This house, your house, does that now." Adrian stepped forward, fury in his voice. "You don't get to decide what people believe in." The architect looked at him. "I didn't decide," he said. "They did." He pointed to the thousands watching, to the comments pouring in, to the hashtags, to the fan edits, the cosplay, the devotion. "They heard the story," he said, "and they chose to believe." Lena stood in silence, the weight of it crashing down on her. Every horror they had survived, every scream, every loss, it had all been twisted into entertainment. People wore it, shared it, slept to it, laughed at it, and worst of all, loved it. She looked at the mixing board. The master switch. She could still shut it off. The architect saw the thought in her eyes. "You can cut the signal," he said. "Right now. Pull the plug, delete the source." "But," she asked. "But it won't matter," he said. "It's already out there. The signal is seeded. The backups exist. The memories have been planted in too many minds. The story will remember itself." Adrian looked at her, waiting. She hovered over the switch, trembling. Then she pulled it. The room went dark. Every screen blanked. The hum stopped. The loop paused. For a breathless moment, the world went quiet. And in that silence, Lena felt something incredible. Not peace, not triumph, but choice. Because for the first time in years, the voice wasn't louder than her own. She turned to Adrian. "Let's leave." They walked out of the studio into a world that still pulsed with rhythm and memory. But something had changed. Not the story, not the followers. Them. They were no longer participants. They were no longer characters. They were people again. And though the house still echoed in a million headphones, though the red door still appeared in nightmares and tea, shirts and childhood rhymes, Lena understood something vital. The house had always needed listeners. But it could never survive those who stopped repeating. She didn't speak. She didn't record. She didn't retell. And maybe that was the only true escape. Not running. Not destroying. Just choosing to stop. The silence didn't hum. The story didn't follow. The final second ticked. And the loop, at long last, didn't restart.